that dial. You're now listening to Debate Talk Free Radio.
HebrewWay.com, high-quality custom Israelite apparel store. The place to find scripture-based attire for men, women, and children of all ages. We have a wide range of t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts, caps, beanies, and bags, available in a full range of sizes. Also, the ideal place to find Israelite gifts for family and friends. HebrewWay.com is geared toward awakening men and women and especially the youth worldwide. Try our uniquely crafted collection with free shipping on eligible items. Help spread the word of the Most High. Visit us at HebrewWay.com. That's HebrewWay.com.
Brother B.A. Ben Abraham, and I'm your host of the Man Up segment on Debate Talk For You platform. The objective is for all brothers from different walks of life to come together, link up, and build on matters concerning all various stages of life. If anyone would like to reach out on concepts and ideas, you can reach Brother B.A. at radicalrhyme1984@gmail.com. Again, radicalrhyme1984@gmail.com. Tap in. Let's build. Shalom. Shalom.
HebrewWay.com, high-quality custom Israelite apparel store. The place to find scripture-based attire for men, women, and children of all ages. We have a wide range of t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts, caps, beanies, and bags, available in a full range of sizes. Also, the ideal place to find Israelite gifts for family and friends. HebrewWay.com is geared toward awakening men and women and especially the youth worldwide. Try our uniquely crafted collection with free shipping on eligible items. Help spread the word of the Most High. Visit us at HebrewWay.com. That's HebrewWay.com. Shalom.
Yes, that one good. Yeah, I think to start out, just want to give thanks to the God of Israel, the Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and wanted to take a look at marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Generally, when I'm speaking to a lot of different people who teach the Bible or believe the Bible or understand the Bible or attend some type of fellowship or church or religious institution, what I've come to find is that there are so many different views. I tried to post a link for the visual presentation to go this, but apparently it's on the wrong platform, so I can't present it live like I want to. But if you're able to follow along, I don't know. Sal, did you post the link at all?
Yeah, I put it up on Facebook right now, my Facebook page, and I'm about to put it in the description box on Blog Talk now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So if people able to click the link, it'll walk you through the presentation that I'm going through. And the title of the lecture or lesson or whichever have you is Marriage, Divorce in Israel. So I think my search and quest for this has started out probably about 17, 18 years ago, and I was working at an institution and met a woman who was an older woman, and she understood that I was studying the Bible, and she had been through some complications with her husband, and she was asking me, my husband did this, my husband did that. Is there anywhere in the Bible that I say I can leave him and get married again? And in my naivety back then, I told her yes. The more I began to search out what the scripture says about what constitutes marriage, what separates marriage, and then what allows for remarriage, I began to find out that scriptures is talking like its own set of thoughts, independent of my thoughts. So I wanted to start out on that course first, just to give a description of what this topic is, how it kind of came about, and then, my search in the scriptures. So what I'm putting out today is my study. I'm a member in fellowship with the Congregation of Israel, and most people who may be familiar with, Sal, may be familiar with Elder Jude or Elder Zadok or such and such, Elder Tim, which have you. But I do also just want to make known that as I'm examining this is open for feedback, this is open for questions, it's open for critical analysis. But this is my study, and when I say my study, it's something that I've spent some time doing and examining, and I really want to be really, really intentional about covering what I'm presenting and my views on it as I'm convinced by the scriptures. Again, it's open for dialogue and feedback. So generally when I start out a lecture or just study, if you're looking at the first link in the video, if you're on it, I start out with strategic questions. So what strategic questions are we trying to answer specifically on marriage, remarriage, and divorce? And there are 4 questions that I want to take a look at. The first question in our strategic question set is, when Jesus spoke on divorce, did he instruct or permission something different from Moses? So even when the Pharisees, when the Sadducees, when his own disciples heard his teachings on marriage, everybody was shocked. Like, what are you talking about? Because they had a view of what Moses was teaching on divorce. And, I guess like when you play operator or when you communicate a message through the process of time, that original message gets lost, and then people confuse what is actually being said and what was meant by what's being said than what was actually intended to be meant by what was being said. So our first strategic question that we can look at is, when Jesus spoke on divorce, did he instruct or permission something different from Moses? That's the very first thing that I want to look at. Well, that's one of the strategic questions I want to look at. The second one is, why did Moses allow for divorce, and was it for every cause? So when you're dealing with a large community of people, a few million people walked out of Israel. So many were adults, so many were children, etc. He was a legislator given different laws as the Creator told him, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, God didn't tell Moses that people can divorce, that Moses made that up. I've heard that, and I heard a bunch of other teachings. But why did Moses allow for divorce, and was it for every cause? Because that's the exact question that was asked to Yeshua in the New Testament. Can you get divorced for every cause? So we're going to take a look at that as one of our strategic questions. Third strategic questions, and I always like to start out with questions because this kind of sets the tone of what we're examining. And bear with me if you're watching the presentation because it has a couple of spelling errors, even though I'm really fanatical about spelling. Third question is, if you were married and divorced, are you allowed to remarry? So that's the third question that we're going to look at. And then the fourth question that is really pivotal to this conversation is, what is fornication? So we're going to look at what is fornication, just as a review, as one question. If you were married and divorced, are you allowed to remarry? Why did Moses allow for divorce, and was it for every cause? That's another question we're looking at. And when Jesus spoke on divorce, did he instruct or permission something different from Moses? So these are the 4 guiding thoughts or questions that are going to guide this lecture or study. Second thing, of course, anytime you're learning, ideally you have the intent of the teacher, the elder, the pastor, the bishop, the instructor. Like, what is his intent in teaching? And my intent is honestly to ask or answer those 4 questions. But if there was something different or in addition to, I want to view the context and definitions by the scriptures and other references. So when I say fornication or any other word, I want to view the context by the scriptures and what the scriptures are referring to. Second learning objective is examining the teachings and environment of Moses, Jesus, and Paul. I'm under the influence that there's almost perfect uniformity in what all 3 of them were saying on marriage, remarriage, and divorce. We also want to look at remarriage and examine who can remarry if they are divorced and what the conditions of remarriage are. And that is some of our learning objectives. Last thing I want to jump into kind of before we get started is what my argument is not, right? So I'm not arguing any personal feelings. I'm not here to emote and say, well, this happened to me and I feel this type of way. And, sometimes when you're dealing with the scriptures on certain issues that may be hot button topics, people feel or respond emotionally a certain way. And I'm not here to manage people's emotions. I'm not here to, emote and make you feel my emotion on a personal view of the subject. I really just want to look at what the text is saying, and hopefully, during the process of the question ask, have time for some dialogue. on it. The critical text that we'll be looking at is Mark 10, verse 11 and 12, Matthew 19 and verse 9, and Deuteronomy 24. So those are the critical texts that we'll be looking at, and those critical texts will do the guiding for most of this study. So with that in mind, I want to start out in Matthew chapter 19, and the topic again is marriage, divorce, and remarriage. And really, I'll start out by saying there are only certain conditions that allow a person to be married, separated by divorce, and then eligible to be able to be remarried according to the scripture. And that, I believe, is uniform in what Paul was expressing, what Moses or Moshe was expressing, and then what Yeshua or Jesus Christ was expressing. And there's a lot of consistency in those three. So I want to start off in Matthew 19. And again, there's a lot of things that I'm not arguing or debating or presenting. What I'm primarily looking at to present is the conditions, the environments, the thoughts, and the exact things that came out of the mouth of Yeshua Messiah when it came down to marriage, remarriage, and divorce. So I'm starting this out in Matthew chapter 19, and I'll start reading at verse 3. It says, the Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him. So notice here the context of everything that's getting ready to happen was they were tempting him, or you can say testing him, or you can say examining him. Like, what are your views on this? You're supposed to be a teacher. What do you think about this? And saying unto him, is it lawful for a man to put his wife away for every cause? So they were examining him based upon what was understood to be said by the prophet Moses. So is it lawful to put your wife away for every cause? And this is the question that they asked him. And in preparation for his response, he began to be able to answer their response. And I want to focus on a part of his response, which he answered quite cunningly, because certain things he exclusively seemed to avoid in his answer. In his response, this is Matthew 19 and verse 4, and he answered and said unto them, have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? So he didn't even get into Moses. He took it back to pre-Moses, if you would. And his answer was, he that made them male and female. So before you try to trap me up in talking about what allow a person to be divorced, what allow a person to be put away, the first thing he's making notice is that, from the beginning it was male and female. Verse 5, he said, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the twain shall be one flesh. This is quoting Genesis. Wherefore there are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. So before I get into, or as Christ is putting it, before I even get into any debate over why you can put a woman away, the two should be one flesh, and nobody should divide them. Very diplomatic answer. Nobody can argue that, because you can't argue with the Genesis, right, the Bereshit. Nobody can go back and say, well, Adam could have did this, or Eve could have did this. Like, there's no argument there, right? The two join together, let nobody put them asunder. 7, they say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and put her away? So now notice that their question a little bit changes, right? So they're not saying anymore, can you put her away for every cause? They said, well, since you didn't answer that question, why did Moses say we can put her away at all, right? So I'm going to look into the book of Josephus, which is a historian who, had a decent amount of historical knowledge and, lived during the antiquities in the time period. And I want to focus on what the bill of divorcement was understood by the people in Josephus' day, and as he's articulating what the Pharisees would have understood, because people would say, well, Josephus was a Pharisee, and there's evidence to point that out. So this is the book of Josephus, the complete works. This is chapter 4. This is book 4, chapter 8, and it's section 23. It says, let the Hebrews marry at an age fit for it, virgins that are free and born of good parents, and that he does not marry, and he that does not marry a virgin, let him not corrupt another man's wife and marry her, nor grieve her former husband. All right, and then he talks about the slaves that can be married. But he's saying let them marry, and then this is what's permissible to do. Later on in section, I think I'm picking up at 253, it says, he that desires to be divorced from his wife for any cause, this is what Josephus is saying, he that desires to be divorced from his wife for any cause, whatever, and many such causes happen among men, let him in writing give assurance that he will never use her as his wife anymore, for by this means she may be at liberty to marry another husband, although before this bill of divorce be given, she is not permitted to do so. But if she be dismissed by him also, or when he is dead, her first husband would marry her again, it shall not be lawful for her to return unto him. So notice here that Josephus seems to be articulating, at least the way that I'm reading it, he that desires to be divorced from his wife for any cause, she too short, she too stubby, she gained too much weight, she don't cook the right way, she always show up late, she argue too much. Any cause, this is Josephus saying, put her away and just write her bill of divorcement and she can go be another man's wife. This is the same understanding the Pharisees seem to ask, because they came to him saying, is it lawful to put your wife away cause? She burnt the toast, she show up late, she never got a master's degree, she don't make enough money, she got too many kids, her toes look a certain way. Any cause, like, is that lawful to do? This is what they're asking him. And his response to the Pharisees, speaking of Christ in Matthew chapter 19, is from the beginning it was not so, and let no man put asunder. Now, after they got that answer, their very next step was to implicate Moses. Well, why did Moses say that? Right? So I think in a sequence or a line of study, if they pull Moses into the picture, then I think our very next step is for us to pull Moses in the picture. So again, the Pharisees understood. I'm going to argue that even the disciples understood, and that you can put away a woman for every cause. And why do I say that the disciples understood it? We'll look at it a little later. But they came to him and said, man, if the case be so for a man with his wife, if you have to marry a woman and be with her for the rest of your life and you can't put away for every cause, then basically it's not even good to marry. Like, who can do that? Because the dominant notion in that time and age was, look, man, I mean, you can trade her out. You can upgrade her. You can lease it for a certain period of time, and then when the lease expired, the tires wear out, too much mileage on it, trade it in just for something better. But was that the intent of the Almighty from the beginning? I'm going to assert that, no, this is not what Moses meant, nor is this what Yeshua is going to point out in Matthew chapter 19, amongst other texts. So one of our central focuses here is Matthew chapter 19. So here, why did Moses put in writing or say you can give her a bill of divorcement? Let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 24. So if they're going to implicate Moses, involve him in a necessary way and say, well, all right, we ain't talking about the beginning now, right? So we know that whatever from the beginning. Why did Moses say that this is now cool to do or permissible to do? So looking at Deuteronomy chapter 24, And when we go into Deuteronomy 24, we're going to pick it up right at verse 1. And it says, when a man have taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he hath found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house. And when she is departed from out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. All right. So Moses said, as we're reading, no matter what the Pharisees understood, no matter what Josephus understood, Moses said, if a man marry a woman, and at a certain point in time he find no favor in her, that he can write her a bill of divorcement, and she may go and become another man's wife. Well, the only caveat to that is Moses didn't just say she can just randomly go and be another man's wife. He said, because he have found some uncleanness in her. So I'm going to make the argument is that in order for this bill of divorce to be cleanly initiated, he, meaning the man, would have to have found some uncleanness in her. Well, then the question begets, well, what is that uncleanness? I'm going to argue that that uncleanness is the same situation that Christ argued in the New Testament. The very same argument that Christ put up, his disciples or the Pharisees, after they honed in a little more on their question, is the very same thing that Moses was saying. So I'm going to take time to go to the Strong Concordance, and for me it's necessary to do, to look up what was Moses saying here, because he qualified, not you can just put her away for every cause. You may find that she don't find favor in your eye. Well, Leah didn't find favor in Jacob's eye, but was that a reason for Jacob to put Leah away? Because like, yo, man, she was ill-favored. I mean, I think it says she was tender-eyed, which I think, tender mean when your eye hurt, I guess, when you squinting, like, dang, who want to look at her? She just didn't look like Rachel. So it's not just like she's not favorable. That's not my argument. Like, he don't find any favorable. It's something that was done that caused him to not have favor, or caused her not to have favor in his eyes anymore. Now, before I go into the word uncleanness, which we're going to look up here, I also want to be really emphatic and intentional about what Moses said, because as we go through the study, we'll kind of look at people's interpretation of all different type of texts in this New Age thought, which I'm going to argue just wasn't what Moses said, it wasn't what Jesus said, nor was it what Paul said, meaning this. In Matthew 24, it says, when a man have taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he have found some uncleanness in her, let him write her a bill of divorcement. Now, some people will argue, well, if the woman finds some uncleanness in her husband's eye, then she can write him a bill of divorcement. That's not what it says. And people say, well, it was just talking to the man, because that's the time that most of them talk to the man, and it was just generic, just like when you say keep the Sabbath day holy or thou shalt not steal, that apply to everybody. Not so, and we'll look at that. This was instructions to men to be able to provide provisions or permissions for men to put away their wives if they found something unclean in her, and that uncleanness caused them not to have favor. So looking up the concording word cleanness is in the concordance. The Strong's number is 6172, and it would sound like erva or something similar from 6168. And it says nudity, literally, especially the pudenda. Now, I'm going to argue what the pudenda is. It sounds just like people would use it in slang, right? The pootie, the vagina, the etc. It was some type of nakedness or nudity that he found in her, what Moses said, uncleanness. And it says disgrace, blemish, nakedness, shame, uncleanness. And just for the point of exaggeration, I'm going to get a couple of the points that I would think that it would be pointing out. Now, in 6168, which the word derives from, or ra, says the primitive root cause to make bare, hence to be empty, pour out, demolish, leave destitute, discover, empty, make naked, pour out, raise, spread, self, uncover. So I'm going to go with the ideal, and again, people can argue this. We can write in or call in. We'll ask questions about it. We can dialogue and see if what I'm saying matches up to what people understand, or maybe not. Maybe I'm way off key. But if the word uncleanness has to do with nudity, literally, not allegorically, literally, or it says especially the pudenda, and you can look that word up and see what it means. And then it says, or figuratively, disgrace, blemish, nakedness, shame. And then the root word says to discover, to empty, or to spread self or uncover. I'm asserting that what Moses was teaching was that if a man found some type of uncleanness in his wife, meaning some type of nudity, or he found her spreading herself, or in the words of Jesus of Nazareth, fornication, then he can write her a bill of divorcement and she can go be another man's wife. Well, people say, well, how so, Brother Moses? That don't seem like it could be true. Well, why not? Because if he found something in her, then she would have been stoned to death. Or if he found something in her, then he could have done this, or it could have been a law of jealousy, or it could have been a bunch of different scenarios that it could have been. But, for example, in order according to the Torah, if you were going to stone somebody according to Leviticus or Deuteronomy, then you needed 2 or more witnesses. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, man walks into his own house, after a 3-week vacation, doing business and selling goats or whatever he was doing, and he finds his wife with some brother down the street being fondled. That's some type of nudity, or some type of nakedness, or some type of spreading herself, or emptying herself out, or pouring herself out to a whole other individual that would allow him to say, I don't find no favor in your eye. Let me write you a bill of divorce. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, that was the case. So somebody was groping her. Somebody was tongue kissing her. Like, this is absurd. Like, what are you doing? Now, the man could say, this don't bother me at all. Whatever. I've been gone. I should have been gone for 3 weeks. You kissing on somebody else. I deserve that. I'll try to be closer to home. He got that right. But he also has the right, according to what Moses was legislating, to write a bill of divorce. And under that bill of divorce, it was specificity. Could he do it for any reason, as Josephus understood? Could he do it for any reason, as the Pharisees understood? Or could he write a bill of divorce for any reason, as the disciples understood, until a teacher came along to correct him? No, it can't be for any reason. It says specifically because he have found, this is Deuteronomy 24 and the middle of verse 1, because he have found some uncleanness in her, then let him write a bill of divorcement. So I'm going to go on record thus far to qualify and say, if he did not find some uncleanness, then he cannot write a bill of divorcement. Well, that sounds like the same thing that Yeshua or Nazareth said, which we'll look at in a second. So when you look up the word uncleanness, it seems to point back to the ideal of nakedness, or fornication, or sexual immorality, or spreading herself, that allowed that man to put her away. Now, people say, well, what about the law of jealousy? Well, the law of jealousy generally only applied to if the man was jealous and supposed that she was messing with another man. What if a man was not in the picture? As grotesque as it would be, what if she was being fondled or touched or something by another woman? He may say, I can now put her away because that's unclean. I've got to get rid of her. What if, for God forbid, that it was a beast involved? Like he came in and, they going to gather his hay and it's some bestiality going on. It's the donkey that's in the stable, some type of horse or something like that. Then he can put her away because that's unclean. But it does not say that he can put her away for any reason. That's just not what Deuteronomy says. So I'm going to make the assertion again, is that Moses didn't even allow a man to put away his wife for every cause. It specifically, with a lot of specificity, according to my understanding, and what I'm reading in the text, and again, it's open for questions, dialogue, and debate, but he found some uncleanness in her. So what could be the uncleanness? Well, let's say that she was being fondled by a man, which technically may not be adultery because maybe he didn't actually go inside her and lay with her, because most of the cases of adultery in the text, when we read it, if a man force a woman and lie with her, if a man do such and such and lie with her. Well, if he didn't lie with her, then technically, and I'll get into some other specificity around that, technically we couldn't say that she committed adultery, technically, because he actually didn't go ahead and actually have a full-blown sexual escapade with her. But let's just say they was kissing. That's fornication as far as I'm concerned. That's sexual immorality, or that's some type of uncleanness that would say you should not have been doing that. And let's say that there were no witnesses to see it, only he saw it. Well, she couldn't necessarily be put to death. Or let's say, again, like I made mention of, it was some type of creature or animal, or it was another woman. Like, these are different variables or scenarios that would say, you know what, this is not kosher, this is not cool, I can write you a bill of divorcement. But if it came down to adultery, and I want to be clear about that, if it came down to adultery, then I'm going to presuppose and even state that the man's wife would have actually had to physically had sexual relations with that person, not just you came in and, he was stroking her hair and rubbing her neck and he just didn't like that. But if he saw that, and let's say he saw it on 4 occasions, he had the right to put that woman away, according to Moses. Now, let's go back into Matthew chapter 19, and let's see, thus far, if the thoughts of Jesus of Nazareth concur with this concept. So this is Matthew chapter 19. Going back to Matthew chapter 19. And he says that, and this is verse 7, then say they unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and put her away? So now I'm arguing that we just saw why Moses allowed for a writing of divorcement. Verse 8, he saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Well, I don't think he was just talking to the Pharisees that were allowed to put away their wives. I'm saying any man that I probably know, and I don't know all men, and I don't know all of the hearts of all men because some men are relatively forgiving. Most men that I know, if they walked in and saw their wife exposed in any appropriate manner to some other woman, their heart would probably be hard. That's most men. I'm going to say definitely would be hard. That's just about every man I know. Now, again, they may have the Ruach HaKodesh and if the Spirit take them over and say, well, God forgave you your sins, you should forgive her. So let's say that this is the third time it happened in 7 years. Let's say that it's the 10th time in 22 years. Let's say it's the first time. I'm saying, man, I just bought you a ring, house, taking care of you, and we haven't been married a year and a half, and I come in and is this some old boyfriend that you used to like? Just like what? Like, what is this? Heart gonna be hard. That's most people that I know. And when you see it depicted in Hollywood, I mean, folks is grabbing weapons and, they taking it to a whole nother level. Like, look, man, one of y'all not walking out of here because of anger or the hardness of your heart. But in the Bereshit or in the Genesis, was Adam putting away Eve for anything? Was it any, like Adam lived to be 900 some years, but did we ever read a record where Adam's heart was hard, so he put the mother of all living away? No, I mean, I'm under the influence that if Eve was with somebody else, it would have been one of her sons, and that would just be whack, right? And if Adam was with somebody else, it would have been one of his children, And that would have just been whack. I mean, maybe, people get into whether the two siblings could do something or the cousins or whichever have you. But as a man, you don't got no business playing with not nailing one of your children. Point blank, period. Because when Lot's daughters did it, shouldn't have been done. All right? So this here, from the beginning, your heart probably going to be hard if you walked in and saw something like that. But from the beginning, I'm saying, you don't read a record of that. This is Matthew 19 and verse 9. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whosoever marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. Let me read that again, because this is part of the crux of why we're actually talking about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So, Moses put a hardened to say your heart. Adam didn't put his wife away. Apparently, he was with her for the whole time. And I don't think she was going to be running around sleeping with one of her kids anyway, but that's just my understanding of it. But in verse 9 it says, and I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife. So if a man, and their question was, why did Moses say that? Moses said, for the heart to say your heart. Now, Christ is saying the same thing Moses saying. If you find some uncleanness in her, or pudenda, or she has spread herself out, or some nakedness, literally, she's given herself to some other man, which maybe they didn't actually go ahead and have sexual intercourse, but if these things have happened, and you want to put her away, if it's not for fornication, put her away. That's what Christ is saying. So if fornication is not in the picture, I'm saying, and I believe Christ is saying, that woman cannot be put away. Not because of toast burned, not because she gained weight, not because her hair's too short or she bleached it or she want locks and you want her to have short hair. Not any other reason except it be for fornication. Well, maybe the question would be asked, well, what the heck is fornication? Well, very legitimate question, which we're going to have to, by default, begin to dive into. So when you look up the word fornication, the Greek, it would say porneia, and it would just really, in other resources, which we're going to look at one of them, it would just generally explain, it would generally explain sexual immorality or porneia. And I've found so many people that have so many various definitions of it. For example, I have a person that I know whose wife decided to divorce him because I think he was flirting with another woman, and I can now put him away because he fornicated. That's a very lame argument. Or he was watching some inappropriate video, so I can put him away because he fornicated. That's very, very conventional, right? That's just not what Jesus of Nazareth was saying. Or he laid with some other woman, so I can put him away because he fornicated. That's not what Jesus of Nazareth was saying. And I'm saying really particularly, he said that if anybody put away his wife, so we're focusing on a man, gender, putting away his wife, female, except it be for fornication. So if you put a wife away and marry another one, you have committed adultery. Again, if you put away your wife and marry another, you have committed adultery. This is what seems to be being said to me. Now, I'm looking in this book called The Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible. This is volume E through J. It's pretty much a dictionary, encyclopedia, whichever have you. And under the word fornication, it says, the practice of sexual immorality or harlotry, and what do harlots do? Just like probably Moses was arguing, nakedness is part of it, pudenda is part of it, and spreading yourself abroad is part of it. So this is all fornication, or as Moses put it, uncleanness. So the practice of sexual immorality or harlotry, hence a symbol of idolatry. So you can have literal fornication And you can have spiritual fornication. For example, Israel in the days of Isaiah and I believe Ezekiel was fornicating with the king of Egypt because they wanted to, in opposition to what Yahweh told them to do, they wanted to go create a relationship with the king of Egypt to protect them from the Assyrians or I forgot what or Cyrus or whoever the exact king was. And he's like, look, man, don't go try to run over to them and make promises and covenants and spread yourself and do commerce with them. No, you shouldn't be doing that. So you have literal and spiritual, if you will, fornication. But nobody in Israel, the nation of Israel, wasn't going to sleep with all of Egypt sexually, right? So that's not the point. But in the Old Testament, this is back to the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible under the word fornication. In the Old Testament, it is equivalent to playing the harlot. And they give some different examples. It says also see prostitution. In the New Testament, the words for fornication, to practice fornication, refer to every kind of sexual intercourse outside of marriage. Now, with this in view, if we transport that definition back to Moses as far as uncleanness, a man's wife could find no favor in his eyes because she committed some of every type of sexual intercourse outside of her marriage. Again, it could be you walk in and somebody's, they have their mouth on her breast. Did she actually have sexual intercourse with them? Like, was it adultery? Nope. It was fornication. Is adultery a type of fornication? Yes. So the word fornication is just like the word construction or the word law. So if you know somebody who's saying, when I graduate high school, I'm going to go to, Johnson & Wales or Stanford or Harvard, and I want to study to be a lawyer. And then, the wise person would ask, well, what type of law? Oh, okay, I want to practice construction law. Okay, that's a lot different law than criminal defense or international law or business commerce law or trade law or constitutional law or any other various types of law, civil law, litigation law, auto liability law, transportation law. So the word the word fornication is just like the word law. It's a broad term that can include, like if I said I'm a lawyer, that don't mean I can go get you out of a speeding ticket because I only practice family law. And I may know a couple tricks in the book, but I may not know the type of things that'll get you out of the situation you're in. Or I may practice real estate law, and I hope that's understood. So when a person says fornication, it's almost akin or equivalent to them saying construction or law. So, for example, if a person is in construction, oh, man, I work in construction. What do? I'm a flagger. Okay, that's a whole lot different from being an electrician. Well, that's a whole lot different from being a bookkeeper at a construction company. Construction isn't just all hammers and nails, or every time somebody say fornication, they may not be talking about adultery. Or every time somebody say adultery, they may not be talking about fornication. Because adultery is a specific type of fornication. Just like bestiality is a specific type of fornication. Just like incest is a specific type of fornication. Just like premarital sex is a specific type of fornication. But that doesn't mean that it's the type of fornication that every individual may create. So, or be involved in. So according to the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, the word fornication, or to practice fornication, refers to every kind of sexual intercourse outside of marriage. Man, this person had premarital sex. They was fornicating. This person is a teenager and they was at the prom and somebody's touching all over them. They were fornicating. This man walked on his wife and she was tongue kissing him and the husband didn't like it. She was fornicating. I'm not necessarily going to say that she committed adultery. She could have actually committed the full act of it, and I'll get into the specificity of that also. But my point in saying that all is back to Matthew chapter 19, along with the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible. Every sexual act or any type of sexual act is considered fornication. So anything, let's just say he was, I mean, again, not to draw it all out, but I just want to be clear about it. They got some type of, just rubbing on each other. They was fornicating. That's sexual immorality. They fornicated. So it's really clear here that if a man wanted to put away his wife and fornication was not in view, now notice he didn't say adultery, which is just one type of fornication. He said fornication, except it be for fornication, like that woman didn't commit fornication, and shall marry another, then he committeth adultery. I'll get into this later because I also want to say that this is Christ talking about a man putting away his wife for another woman without just cause. He committeth adultery. So if he don't have a just cause to put her away, then he has committed adultery. Now, let's say that he has a just cause to put her away. She fornicated, which means she could have done a broad array of things that wasn't necessarily adultery. It could have been bestiality, so you can't, like you kill a man and the woman and the beast, but let's say there weren't two witnesses and just he saw it and she ain't trying to fess up. You couldn't do the law of jealousy because, I don't think her belly was going to be brought out because I think the law says specifically, like, make sure you've got no other man that came unto you and lied with you, etc. And I can look at that to be for certain. But any type of sexual immorality that she committed, and it came and it's the husband is aware of it, he can put her away. If he puts away a wife and it's not for that cause, and he marries another, then he committeth adultery. Notice the next clause in that statement. And whosoever marrieth her, which is put away, committeth adultery. Let me exaggerate my point again. Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. So man A, let's call him John, is married to Jane, which is woman A, and John wants to put Jane away, and Jane didn't fornicate. He can put her away, but Jesus says specifically, if he decide to marry another, he commit adultery. So what if he just want to put her away? Like, I just want to be separate from you, I don't want to be with you, and let's say that lasts for 30 months. By implication, he didn't say anything was wrong with that. But what he didn't say was that you can go marry another woman when you put the first one away. So person A couldn't put person B away for person C. So let's say, in another example, man A wants to put woman A away and then marry woman B. Again, that's criminal. That's committing adultery. But let's say that man A is already married to woman A and wants to marry woman B or has sex with woman B. No problem there. Jesus didn't even address that. He said if you put away one wife for another and she did not commit a fornication, that's wrong. You can't do that. So I think that kind of, to me, nulls the notion where you can just put her away for every cause. And again, we can question dialogue on it. I'm going to pause soon to open up for questions with what's put on the table thus far before we continue the dialogue. So I'll pause soon. Now, the second part of that said is, whosoever marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. So I'm arguing here that if a man marries a woman that's put away, meaning her husband put her away and he didn't put her away for fornication, or she left her husband and she just wanted to be with another man, then she committed adultery. Both of them are adulterers in Jesus' eyes. Now, to me, that's really plain, but again, I think a lot of people read it and imply, well, man, no, it says if he cheat on me, then I can go be with somebody else. He never said that. That's not even in this verse right here in verse 9. He don't say who can have permission to go marry who else. He don't even address that. He only say that if you put her away and she didn't commit fornication and you marry somebody else, you commit adultery. And whoever marry a woman that's put away, then they commit adultery. Hey, I met my wife 2 years ago, and she was married to such and such before, and they got divorced, and now me and her together because she was my high school sweetheart. Why did her husband put her away? Or why did they break up? Oh, she didn't fornicate? Then you an adulterer. Point blank, period. Now, again, we can look at that, we can dialogue, we can argue it, but I'm saying emphatically, that's what 19:9 says clearly when you just read what 19:9 says. Even if you look at the historical context and read all the rest of it, 19:9 says, you marry a woman that's been divorced, commit adultery by marrying her, specifically if she was not put away for the cause of fornication. Now, verse 10, this is Matthew 19 and verse 10. His disciples say unto him, if the case of a man be so with his wife, it's not good to marry. Meaning, if I got to be with this woman and I can't put her away for every cause, that's the way I'm understanding it, it's not even good to marry. Notice Christ's response in verse 11. But he said unto them, all men cannot receive the same, save them to whom it is given. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men. So I'm under, again, the impression that what he's talking about, if the opposite of putting a woman away for every cause is staying with a woman like Adam stayed with her, and the disciples were saying, if I got to be with a woman 930 years or however long Adam lived, nah, you shouldn't even get married. Because in 930 years or in 40 years or in 20 years or in 15 years or in 3 years or in some people's cases, many people's cases, they've been married 12 months, especially in this what they call Hebrew community or Israelites and Christian and Jehovah's Witnesses. What they tend to do is they doing so much wife swapping, it's crazy. Like, okay, I don't like her no more. We irreconcilable differences. He didn't say nothing about irreconcilable differences in Matthew 19:9. So if you were put away and it wasn't for fornication, Jesus ain't say nothing about you going to go marry nobody else. Point blank, period. And for the husband, if you put away a wife, like, oh man, I bumped into my old girlfriend from college, and man, you know, we just kind of got that old thing back, and we gelled, and me and my wife been having problems, so man, I ain't really rocking with her no more. I'm about to go over here and get back with my old high school sweetheart because we always hit it off. We was best friends and we was close, and your wife didn't commit fornication, then you are an adulterer. Bam. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 19:9. So we will be definitely open up for dialogue and see if people got questions about that. So thus far, we covered our critical text, which was Deuteronomy 24. And I'm asserting, as well as hopefully validating to the listeners, that uncleanness that Moses talking about was the same fornication that Messiah was talking about. And if you are not putting your wife away for fornication or uncleanness, which include, according to the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, every kind of sexual intercourse outside of marriage, oh man, he fondled her, or he rubbed her, or he kissed her, or she did something. That man has no right to put that woman away if it's not for one of those specific types of fornication. Now, it could have been adultery, which I'm asserting again, is a type of fornication, but it could not have been adultery because it could have been bestiality, God forbid. It could have been lesbianism, God forbid. It could have been just something he ain't even like. Like every time I come home, this guy in here, and he just leaving out the house. I'm not doing a whole bunch of guesswork. You said you ain't sleep with him. I took it to the law of jealousy, and that didn't work. You ain't. Maybe it didn't happen. And again, we can look at the law of jealousy. But I'm not even feeling this. You doing something. I'm putting you away. Now, I'm going to go on record to assert, so people understand, this gives the woman no power to write her own bill of divorcement, because it's not. This statement here is not even geared to the woman. It's geared to the man. So if the woman commit fornication, or if the woman put away without just cause, that man who married her after she put away, she committed adultery. That's Matthew 19:9. Now, let's see if this concords or comports with Mark chapter 10, because when you look at the Gospels, it was said more than once, and it was actually phrased different in Mark chapter 10. So let's go to Mark chapter 10. And after we review this, I think I'll pause for some questions and then jump back into the second part of it. So this is Mark chapter 10, and we'll pick it up at verse 1. And it says, and he arose and cometh into the coast of Judea by the farther sea of Jordan, and the people resort unto him again. And he was wont and taught them again. And the Pharisees came to him and asked him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? Now notice here in this text, it just don't say for every cause. It just says it lawful to put away his wife. And they were examining him. They were testing him. Like most of the teachers that, I mean, even myself, I'm sure people going to call in and ask testy questions. And not that they're doing anything foul or have some foul intent. Just, well, if you saying this, then show me this. Or what is your thought on this? Or answer this question, which, you want to examine, measure with the standard and make sure the person come up even in the balance. Verse 3, and he answered and said unto them, what did Moses command you? So he said, is it lawful to put away your wife? And Jesus said, here, what did Moses say? He didn't mention anything about the beginning right just this second. And they said unto him, Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away. And Jesus said unto them, for the hardness of your heart he wrote this precept. And I explained a little earlier, again, if a man walked in on his wife and found her in any sexually compromising positions, whether she's being touched, whether she's being fondled, whether there's actual sexual intercourse, whether it's bestiality or lesbianism, whatever it is, any type of, that's going to make the heart hard, and you're going to want to do something about that. Verse 6, Mark 10, verse 6, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the twain shall be one flesh. Verse 9, what therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. And in the house his disciples asked him again of the same, and he said unto them, whosoever shall put away his wife and marry another. So I've been married 5 years, not me, but I'm just saying an example because I've been married longer than that. I've been married 5 years, and I find this other sister that I'm interested in, and I go marry her. Jesus didn't say no problem with that. In this text, he didn't even point that out as a problem. I'm already married, I want another wife. That he's not even addressing that. But what he is addressing is if I'm already married and I've been married 5 years, and I say, look, sister, I don't want to be with you no more, and she hasn't done anything wrong, and I put her away and take another wife, what did Jesus call that? Adultery. Right here in Mark 10, verse 11, and you do that, he committeth adultery against her. Notice here, now in Matthew 19, he didn't talk about the woman or the wife. Here, he's talking to the wife. Notice what he says. And if a woman shall put away her husband. Now, he didn't qualify it with the husband then committed fornication. He's not even going to go there because the reality is men can conceptually commit fornication on their wives, but the types of fornication vary because of the gender. I'll say that again. Men can commit fornication on their wives, but the type of fornication varies by gender. And I'll explain that. So, if a woman shall put away her husband, and I'm saying at all, and be married to another, she committeth adultery. So, irreconcilable differences, and she married another, she committeth adultery. He was on drugs for 2 years, and she left him and married another, she committeth adultery. He was in a penitentiary for 7 years, but he still want to be with her, and she left him and got a divorce. She committeth adultery. Any reason that a woman puts away her husband and marries another, she committeth adultery. That's just what the text say. Again, we could look at it, we can ask questions about it, but it's really nice because that's just what the text say. So if a woman shall put away her husband and be married to another, she committeth adultery. Now, what if he cheated on me, Brother Moses? Sounds like a legitimate question. This brings into play something that I'm not actually dealing with today, but has to be considered when you're talking about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So he cheated on you. Let's say he laid with another woman. Well, David laid with other women, and he took them women to be his wives, whether he took them to be his wives first, and in most cases I'm going to assert, and then he took them to be his wives. Oh. Sorry about that. He took them to be his.
Okay, guys. Yeah, before you continue, just letting y'all know, y'all can call in. You know that number, 319-527-6239. I know there's a lot of people out there like, what? But make sure y'all call in. You know that number, 319-527-6239. And once you call in, you got to press number 1, and they'll let us know that you have a question. We're going to pause real soon. So if you have any questions in regards to this topic, feel free to call in. Again, the number is 319-527-6239. I see we got some callers on the phone line, but you got to press number 1 if you have a question. Continue, Other Moses. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So here again, I'm making the assertion, and this is hopefully backed by what I'm concluding in the text. Whosoever put away his wife and marry another. So again, you put a woman that you've been married to for 2 days, 5 years, 20 years, 40 years, and marry somebody else. As long as that woman is alive, you've been committing adultery, because she didn't do anything worthy of fornication that allowed you to put her away. On the opposite end of that spectrum, if a woman shall put away her husband, well, he laid with somebody else and he talked to somebody else and he did everything. If you put away your husband and be married to another, she committeth adultery. Moses didn't give a woman a right to write a bill of divorcement at all. You just don't read it. Now, again, people say, well, maybe they were just using the gender and then women can do something. No, it's just not stated that way. So I'm only, and this is why I started out by saying what I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing the emotions. I'm not arguing how people feel about it. I'm not arguing stuff that's not in the text. I'm not arguing hypotheticals. Not in the sense that it can't be validated by the text. Point blank period, Moses did not say a woman could write a bill of divorcement for her husband. Yeshua of Nazareth did not say a woman could write a bill of divorcement for her husband. What he did say is if a woman put away her husband, and as long as he be married to another, she commits adultery. I don't care if he was locked up for 2 years. I don't care. Whatever the situation is, right now, you commit adultery. That first husband that you married, y'all fell out, y'all wasn't cool no more, it didn't work out, and you found some more righteous, conscious husband, which he going to have his own set of problems anyway, but you found him, and you took him to your husband, you committed adultery. That's it. You just committed adultery. And when do you stop being an adulterer? I'm probably going to argue when you stop being in that relationship that was away from your first spouse. I'm probably going to argue that, but I don't have a bunch of text to validate that, so don't hold me to that right this second. Now, I also want to look at briefly before we take questions to back up that statement, if a woman put away her husband and be married to another, she committed adultery. All right, so Moses didn't say anything about women putting away their husbands. He just didn't go there. Christ addressed it, and he made it real plain. Now, I'm saying that it's uniformity in what Paul was addressing, because later, after we take questions, we're going to start talking about the allowances that allow men to engage with other relationships outside their wives. And I'm just not talking polygyny per se, but there are other cases in Torah where man could have laid with another woman outside of his wife that the wife couldn't come back necessarily and say, that was fornication. Nah, not according to the Torah, it wasn't. He was allowed to do that. And we'll look at those texts. So when we come back from the question, we'll look at that. So it couldn't just be like, well, he slept with somebody else, so nah, not according to Moses, not according to Jesus. And now we're about to really, really briefly look at not even according to Paul. So this is 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And I'm going to just jump into verse 1, 2, and then I'm going to skip down. He says here, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and I'm again asserting that Moses, Yeshua or Jesus, and Paul all taught the same exact thing. It only varied slightly because certain circumstances arose that the previous patriarchs necessarily didn't have to address. And we'll get into that. 1 Corinthians 7:1. Now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, let every husband have her own. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. So notice here, he said, now concerning the things, plural, which he wrote. Now, me and Elder Zadok was talking this past Sabbath. Neither one of us can look at the things that they wrote in the letter. Like, he mentioned a couple of things, but we don't have a letter, but he said the things that were wrote. So he said it's good for a man not to touch a woman. Now, when you look up that word touch, which I'm not doing right this second, but when you look up that word touch, it says to kindle, right? And I'm going to say that kindle means to, like when you kindle in the fire, like we go camping a lot, whether for, tabernacles or just going to get away from firecrackers or whatever else. When you get your camping wood together or your wood to make a big fire, you start out with little kindling wood. It's small. Little bramble, little bushes, stuffed twigs that burn easily. That touch is that same word, that little kindling. So it's good for a man not to kindle a woman or touch her. Not just, hey, sis, hug, and it's platonic, it ain't no emotion in it, I ain't trying to arouse you, you're not trying to arouse me. It's just, hey, because you could shake her hand, you could put your hand around her, or you give her a hug. It could be your sister in the congregation, a woman, a mother in the ministry, or it could be a coworker. No crime in that. But that touch, when it's designed to arouse, is good for a man. Not why? Verse 2, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, because I'm saying that touch is going to cause fornication, or that touch could even be fornication. And Moses would probably argue the same thing because it could go to every sexual type of act, right, or that type of uncleanness. Let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. And then they got to render due benevolence to each other. So it ain't no need to go outside of that institution in general if you touching the one you're married to. So you don't got to go out, the wife necessarily or the husband, they render due benevolence. Now, I skip down because I'm also just pointing out the wife cannot put away her husband at all and go marry another. The husband can't put away his wife and go marry another unless the wife have committed fornication. So 1 Corinthians 7, and skipping down to verse 10. 1 Corinthians 7 and 10. And unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Creator or the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband. Well, it's the same thing Jesus said. Moses didn't say nothing about a wife departing. Unless there was some type of uncleanness, then she can depart and go to another man's house. But she couldn't initiate no bill of divorcement that I've read under Moses. Now, I could be wrong because it could be some other historical evidence that people say, well, you ain't consider this. I'm not really addressing wives putting away their husband. I'm addressing husbands putting away their wives, and it's not for some type of fornication or sexual immorality, or as Moses called it, uncleanness. So, let not the wife depart from her husband. But if she depart, what did Paul say? Let her remain unmarried. What did Jesus say? Let not the wife put away her husband, because if she marries somebody else, she committed adultery. If she depart from her husband, let her remain unmarried. Or be reconciled to her husband, and let not the husband put his wife away. So, thus far, we looked at some of our learning objectives. We looked at some of our strategic questions, and I'm saying our strategic questions that we were asking was, one, is there a uniformity between Paul, Jesus, and Moses? Are they all saying the same thing? I'm saying yes. Second thing, we looked at, what was Moses actually talking about? Could you actually put away your wife for every cause? Well, that's what the Pharisees thought. Oh, you could put her away. You could put her away, for any reason. That's just not what, when we look at with clarity, Paul wasn't saying that. Like, you can't depart from your husband. And then he said, let not the husband put away his wife. And then later, Paul get into some other things, which we'll look at. So I'll pause right there to see if we have some thoughts, questions, concerns, see if anybody upset, angry, mad, happy, joyous, whichever have you. So turn it back over to Sal and just pause for thoughts, questions, etc.
All right. Once again, family, today's topic is marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Once again, marriage, divorce, and remarriage. You know that number by now. It's 319-527-6239. Let's see if we have some Skype callers. We have a lot of callers on the phone line. I think you done pissed some people off, Elder Moses. But actually, nobody pressed number one, man. I think you got them either in shock or you're like, you know what? If I call in, it's gonna be so right now. But okay, hold on. We got somebody press number one just now. We got somebody pressing number one. Hold on, let's go to the caller. 1614, you're live.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, you loud and clear.
All right, shalom. Good teaching. Just got a question. Is it the reason why a woman cannot divorce or do these sorts of things? Does it go back to the original curse in Genesis 3, like how a woman must be subject to a man? Could that be the reasons why she's unable to do certain things that a man can do? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because, especially with the modern day thinking of a woman, she would think that this is unfair, that a man can do this. But would this link back to the original curse, how obviously Eve, there's certain curses that pertain to women, and this could be one of them.
Yeah, let's mute your mic too when you're done. I'm hearing some background.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just driving the truck.
Yeah. My brother from Australia, right? So Australia, what's going on, man?
Yes. How you going?
All right, man. What's up? I get it, Moses.
Shalom.
I can only kind of insert my thought behind it. I think the curse may have a thing to play in it, but I'm also just going to argue that from the beginning it wasn't so. Like, people weren't putting each other away. But if I was to hone in on that thought, I would say, generally speaking, the woman is designed to be with the man, and ideally or conceptually, her design is to be with that one man for the rest of her life. Like, when you read in the Torah where if a man does profanes the name of a woman in Israel and it wasn't true, then he would beat her. He'd get fined and immersed in 50 shekels, and it would be beat. And then he could not put her away all the days of his life. So I think that is, and I could be wrong, but I think that it's a tendency or proclivity or a natural innate thing in a woman to be with a man, because men have different capacities or faculties. And by that I mean, people get into the polygyny and get into the way the body or the anatomy of a woman is constructed. One example that I hear frequented is that if a woman sleeps with 5 men, nobody knows who the father is. I mean, now you got DNA tests of paternity, and maybe in antiquity you'd have to match him up and see what he looks like and see who he behaves like. If a man sleeps with 5 women, you know who the father is right off the bat. So I think that some way, the way that design and anatomy is made, that may have a part to play in it. But I don't believe that the Creator initially designed for a woman or a man to be separated or divorced. So that's my thought on that. I don't have a lot of scripture to point to right off the top of my head to prove otherwise right this second.
Because you get what I'm saying. A lot of sisters would hear your breakdown, which I agree with, but because they have that modern day thinking, I was just thinking certain scriptures or history that we could use to give them the understanding. But I agree 100% with what you said.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things for me of looking at this thing scripturally or biblically, hopefully we get a few more people calling with different thoughts, but I want to look at the causes scripturally that will allow a married man to lay with another woman, and it would be permissible by Torah. So if a woman would have a problem with that, like, well, I don't want my husband doing that. Well, I'm not really here to argue whether he should do it or not, but what I'm arguing that according to the Torah, there were quite a few cases or circumstances, at least 2 or 3, at least, if not more, that would have allowed for a man to lay with another woman outside of his wife. And the wife back then may have had a problem with it, or she may not have had a problem with it. But the women of old, I can't necessarily say. You can read I don't read where there was any problem between Moses' Ethiopian wife and Zipporah. I just don't read that. Now, just knowing the nature of humans, yeah, there was some type of problem. But I don't read it. So I can't say definitively on that.
So that's what I'm saying. Technically, you know, if a man is married and he sleeps outside of that, she can't leave, regardless.
Not according to the scripture, or she can leave, and this is what Corinthians was pointing out. She can leave, but Paul said, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a hard saying. And I think that's when the disciples were saying, whoa, what are you talking about? Yeah, if you can't divorce your husband for any cause, like, oh, he slept with such and such, or he flirting too much, or he whatever, it's just not written in the text that you had that permission. Because if you do and you marry somebody else, then you're an adulterer. But let's say you leave and just say, I'm going to remain unmarried. Paul addressed that. Christ didn't. But if another man come in the picture and you marry them, you can. And I'm saying, when I say marry, I'm saying even if you cohabitate with them, you are an adulterer. So if you marry them, you're an adulterer. If you say, well, I ain't going to marry him, he's going to be my boyfriend, and we're just going to lay together and sleep, you're still an adulterer because you're married to your first husband.
Yes, thank you for that. Good teaching. Appreciate it.
Hallelujah.
All right, family. Once again, we're opening up the phone lines to the family out there. That number is 319-527-6239. For today's topic, marriage, divorce, and remarriage by Elder Moses. Again, you got to call in. The number is 319-527-6239. You can call in via phone or via Skype and ask your questions live. The only rule that we have is no foul language. You got to keep it clean. Got to keep it professional. Like now, for example, let's say somebody's listening to this lesson right now. Oh, somebody pressed number 1. I'm going to get to you. So let's say somebody's listening to this lesson right now, and they're feeling like really touched or, pricked by the information that you're putting out there. They left their husband or they left their wife for a minimal issue, and they probably moved on and got married to somebody else. What do you recommend that they do?
Just don't move too quick. But I would say what I would recommend is examine in more detail what's being presented. That would be the first step. Like, go dig a little more deeper, ask some questions, and I would definitely say if they're part of a fellowship, present the information and get counsel on the next steps. But I'm not just as capricious, if you would, to just say, just get rid of them and do that, because marriage is so complicated. Like, there are so many cases that can allow you to be married or allow you to be separated or allow you to be remarried, that so many variations in that. I don't know if I, at this moment, have the license to say, look, man, I've been married a year and a half or 2 years, well, let's say 7 years, and I got 2 extra children, and now if I leave, it's got to be, I can't get into the details of that right this moment. So I would definitely say, they would get counsel on it. They would read and study it a little deeper. And, ideally, I'll put my information out there for more dialogue on it. But I'm just not as intentional about saying, do this tomorrow or die. Like, that's not where I'm at right now. But I am saying emphatically, yeah, if that's the situation you're in, Christ called you an adulterer. I will say that.
You committed adultery. That's
the
slogan right there.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next person. 202-520. You're live.
Hello. My name is Gabby. I wanted to ask a question about the word fornication, and I wanted to see if the teacher could define what fornication meant when the nations would fornicate with other nations. It would say that Israel would fornicate with nations like Egypt, and I kind of wanted to reconcile the two. I'm viewing it as like two types of fornication, and kind of see if you could relate them for me to create a better understanding of how to define the sexual or sexual immoral fornication.
It does. And shalom to you, sis. So I would start by going into the prophet Ezekiel. where, again, I would say that it's important to state that fornication includes a broad array of things. Not, I think when people think what fornication, they just think, sex without marriage, but that's not exclusively what it is. So on a spiritual note, if we look at Ezekiel chapter, maybe 16, let me check that up. Ezekiel chapter 16, and start at verse 15. So this is Ezekiel 16, and then verse 15. It says, But thou didst trust in thine own beauty, and playedst the harlot because of thy renown, and pourest out thy fornications on every one that is passed by thee, or passed by. His it was. So when Moses talked about an uncleanness, and then Ezekiel talked about this person or this entity, if you would, and when you look early in the chapter, caused Jerusalem to know her abominations, and your father was a Hittite, your mother an Amorite. I took you, I swaddled you, I dressed you up, I decked you with ornaments, and as a nation, you played the harlot because of thy renown, and you pourest out thy fornications on every side, and everyone that passed by, and said, his it was. So what Israel began to do is they began to form leagues with other nations for various reasons. It could have been economic reasons. Solomon, as a leader of the nation, committed fornication when he began to have Israel deal with when he was dealing with these idolatrous women, and those idolatrous women brought in idolatrous customs, and then everybody was sacrificing to different idols and different gods because of what Solomon brought to the table. So one of the thoughts, and if this is answering your question or not, let me know. One of the thoughts is in Ezekiel 16 in verse 15, he said, you poured out yourself, just like when we looked at that word uncleanness, to pour out, you gave yourself to other people, and everyone that passed by you, his it was. So if somebody came to Israel and say, look, we'll sell y'all these ships so y'all can, dress like us, or we'll show you these clothes so we can dress like y'all. And then they began to break scriptural law in order to be able to get that gain and trade, whether it was trees or ships, and they began to build these temples or houses, or began to even practice commerce like the other nations, because Israel was a socialist society that had a built-in welfare system that everybody could be taken care of. But if they decided, you know what, man, they got a king and they got an empire, and we want to act just like them. We want to have princes set up, and each prince be able to have so many people under the dominion of him and collect tribute and taxes of the own nation. And we can charge interest and usury and have houses of worship in 10 different and 20 and 30 and 40 different locations, and we can celebrate their festivals in ours. They committed fornication. And they gave themselves, as he said, anybody who wanted, you gave it to. That's how the nation would have committed fornication. Now, when it comes down to what Moses is pointing out, I'm saying that uncleanness, Moses is pointing out pretty much the same thing, where the woman was giving herself to another man in whatever capacity. Christ was saying the same thing. If a man put away his wife and she hadn't committed fornication, so that the concording or the interpreter's dictionary of the Bible says that fornication is every type of sexual immorality. And in a spiritual sense, Israel began to identify with the deities, practices of other nations, whatever they were, and that's the thing that caused Israel to be fornicators. And you can let me know if that's clear or not clear.
Yeah, that's clear. I have a follow-up question, however, about the foundational meaning of fornication, or the meaning at its base. Because just looking through the scriptures, it seems like, when I try to reconcile one type of fornication versus another, it seems like the basal meaning is the breaking of a covenant. And I just kind of wanted to know what your thoughts on that was. Do you believe that fornication in some broader sense means to break a covenant?
In one sense, yes. In one sense, yes. So Israel did have a covenant with their husband, which was the Creator. And then the wife would have a covenant with her husband. So in one sense, yes. But because there are different, and when I make this statement, I want to point out for clarity's sake, there are different things that would, for a woman, be considered fornication or sexual immorality that would vary by gender for a man. And I'll give you an example. If a woman slept with anybody besides her husband who she was betrothed or married or engaged to, or had any type of sexual interaction with them, she would be committing fornication. Point blank period. For a man, there are certain things that were permissible for a man to do, a married man, to be cohabitating with a woman who was not married, that would not be considered fornication. Example, David's first wife was Michal, which was Saul's daughter. David was on the run. He meets Nabal's people. He's like, yo, we hungry, we thirsty. Nabal was like, man, basically, shoe fly, get out of my face. I'm not giving you nothing. Abigail finds out about it. Abigail goes and feeds him. Don't kill us all. Nabal, she goes back to tell Nabal. Nabal dies. David is already married to Michal. David was on the run. I don't know if he double-checked with Michal and say, hey, while I'm out in the wilderness running from your dad, I'm going to marry this other woman. But when Nabal died on the spot, David took Abigail to be his wife. Was David a fornicator? I'm going to say no. Now, if David would have laid with her like he laid with Bathsheba, he was a fornicator, and the exact type of fornication he committed was adultery. Why? It was because Bathsheba's husband was still living. Abigail's husband was dead. So if a woman dealt with anybody else besides her husband, whether he was engaged or betrothed to, for example, another example is Mary. When Joseph, who said, I didn't touch her at all, found her to be pregnant, he was ready to put her away, supposing that she had committed fornication. The type of fornication would have been adultery. But, it was told to him, don't put her away, she didn't do anything, etc. But, again, with Moses' scenario, he was married to Zipporah. He took the Ethiopian wife. When he slept with the Ethiopian wife or took her to wife, did Moses commit fornication? The same scenario is different by gender because it was prescriptive that was able to be allowed by gender. So when I say fornication, it carries so many different variations of it. To me, it's not just, it's why, like I said a little earlier, it's almost saying like law or construction because there's so many different types of construction that it doesn't mean every time you say construction, you mean hammers and nails. You may coordinate bids for a construction company to bid on projects, and you still can say, I work in construction. And tell me if that makes sense in terms of clarity in answering your question or
not. Yes, it makes sense that you're saying that fornication, is broad and has many different facets to it.
Yeah, if you have any more questions, you can ask now. Go ahead.
I did have another question. This was it was pertaining to the bit that you said about kind of the many facets of fornication in the sexual realm. So you mentioned if two people were to rub on one another, they would be fornicating. I think that was under the assumption that, one of them were married and they were fornicating with someone else. It might not be adultery, but it would be fornication. And I kind of, people talk a lot about masturbation when they bring up this subject, and I wanted to know if you can kind of as definitively as you mentioned the two people rubbing one another as being fornication, could you definitively say the same for an act like masturbation? And what would be your source for your definitions of fornication and everything that's classified in it?
Okay, so I would say again that the idea that I would probably argue in this sense, and I'll go back to 1 Corinthians 7 to point out this argument, and then I'll go reference back to Deuteronomy amongst any other text. So because I am under the impression that the term fornication includes a broad array of sexual and moral activities that normally involves another person or entity, like an animal, like bestiality is fornication, then I'm probably going to argue and this is maybe independent of what another caller may say or somebody call in and say, that if it's not involving another human being or an animal, then I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to argue it. Because there's no text that argues it, right? So if there was a text that says, if you do this, then you're committing fornication, I don't have license to say that because the text don't license that. There's no text that plainly says, hey, if you masturbate, you're fornicating. It doesn't say that. It just doesn't. Now, I can say my preference because now you can get into so many different variations of who can and can't. Example. So would I say to a single man that he can do that or not? I'm not going to argue that. Like, how would I know you're doing it, right? Would I say to a teenager they can do it? Like, how would I know that? I'm not going to argue that. I really don't even tell me, but I don't know 15-year-old come up to me and say, hey, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. TMI, keep to yourself, just like I wouldn't know much else about the, independent thoughts about it. So I'm concluding that the term involves another person or an entity, like an animal. But if it don't involve a person, I don't have license to say what the scriptures don't say. Now, I'm backing that up from these 2 or 3 examples here. One example is in 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 1. And he says, now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. One person touching another. And when you look up that word touch, it means to kindle. So, you people who've, been exposed to that element, somebody rub their hair, they blow their breath on them, pheromones kick in, and all of a sudden they go from kindle to hot. Now, Paul said that it's better to marry than to burn. Well, burning starts with kindling first. So you kindle first, and then you burn. So if you touch, then you kindle. If you keep it going, you're going to burn, meaning that arousal is going to be so strong that it's going to be unavoidable probably what you're going to do next, which is probably taking it to a whole nother level. And then he says, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, and I'm still concluding that this is touching to arouse another person, then let every man have his own wife and every woman her own husband. Now, let's say, hypothetically speaking, that a couple is married and that they decide to, for gratification purposes, one watches each other touch themselves or whatever have you. All right. Marriage is good and the bed undefiled. So now is that person a fornicator because they did it in the confines of their marriage? I'm not arguing that. By the time I chase that bunny hole all the way down, so you can't do it if you are under this condition or you can't do it under this condition. No, I'm just going to say that there's no clear text that says to me that a person can't do it. Now, again, people can set up boundaries and rules for themselves or for their families or their children, whichever have you, blanketly says that. The only types of fornication that I see involve other physical people. If it's spiritual, it involves people spiritually. If it's physical, it involves other people physically or some other entity.
And what about the portion of the source for the definition? Like, because I know the scripture says fornication, but how would you define it?
Oh, so when I go back to Deuteronomy 24, so I'm using 1 Corinthians 7 as one text to define it. I'm using what Christ said in Matthew 19 to define it. If a man put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and marry another. So I'm using those texts along with Deuteronomy 24 and that uncleanness to define it. So it can vary what a person would consider, let's say a married man. In Moses' day, he may consider the type of fornication different by what was done. So if a married man walked in and saw his wife, again, or, she was exposed to another man and another man was touching her in private areas, the husband can easily conclude that that's sexual immorality or exposing, along with what Ezekiel said about Israel, that anybody who wanted you, you gave yourself to. When you gave yourself to somebody else outside of your husband, you fornicated. Moses just called it uncleanness. But it's all the same pattern of thought, right? Somebody else was touching you to arousal that was not your husband, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense.
All right. Once again, family, you know that number, 319-527-6239. I see we got some more people standing by waiting to ask their questions live. Again, today's show is entitled Marriage, Divorce, and Remarriage. Marriage, Divorce, and Remarriage. By the way, for those who don't want to call in but you still have a question, you can send it via email at debatetalk4u@gmail.com. That's debatetalk4u@gmail.com, and I'll gladly read out your questions to Elder Moses. But let's go to the phone lines once again. Let's go to 865-282. You're live.
Hey, peace, brother. I just had a couple quick questions for you. And my first was, since we're talking about the adultery or fornication and what it's classified as, I wanted to ask that we see in the New Covenant that in 1 Timothy chapter 3, it speaks of the deacons and it speaks of the bishops. And in that context, it says that they must be the husband of one wife. And so my first question to you was, if a deacon or a bishop were to go outside of his one wife, would he be in fornication, adultery, or in some type of sexual violation of the law of God? I can read those texts too as well if you would like me.
Sure. I have it open to it. Good question. I think that's a real good question. I'm going to answer that in two different ways. One, I'm going to tell you a thought that I don't subscribe to, but I see that it follows a pattern in scriptures. So I don't agree with the thought per se, but I see that it follows this pattern in scriptures. So I'm going to read this, and at the same time, I'm going to get the concordance just to point out a thought that I've seen, I've looked at. I don't necessarily wholeheartedly agree, but it definitely follows a pattern in Scripture. So if you wanted to read that, it'll give me time, a few seconds to look up this text that I'm looking at. This concordant word.
1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. I'm going to skip down to verse 12. It says, let the deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well. Those are the two texts.
Okay. So, and the first one I think you read was 1 Timothy 3. Was that it?
Yes, verse 2.
Right. So the concording word for that, and I'm putting this argument out there not because I agree or subscribe to it, but it just follows a pattern of thought. So the concording word is number is 3391 in the Greek. So I'm looking that up now, which I've done before, but it points out a thought that I want to point out. So that word one is the Greek word mia. It says irregular feminine of 1520. Then it says one or first, a certain agree first, one, other. So it says that it is the irregular feminine of 1520. Again, I'm not going to chase down to try to make it saying something it's not, but I'm reading his words because I want to put out there just a frame of thought that, again, I don't necessarily agree with, but I see the sequence and thought in it. So 1520 in the Greek says a primary numeral, one, abundantly, man, one, another, only, other, some, and then it gives some other numbers. And the Greek word is heis. So one thought is this, and again, I'll point out why it seems to have a sequence in it. If you read 1 Timothy this way, with this word, mia, in mind, the bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife. That 3390 says one or first. So I've heard the argument, actually, and don't totally disagree with it. The bishop must be the husband of his first wife. Can he go have another wife? Let's use this example. I just want to follow a sequence of thought. I'm not saying I agree with it or disagree. I just want to paint out a sequence of thought because I'm still kind of looking at that. But the term bishop is a head pretty much of church or the ecclesia or the government or the group. Moses would have been a bishop. Moses was the husband of his first wife. David was a bishop. David was the husband of his first wife. He never left Michal. Saul gave her to another old man, and then David told his crew, Abner and the mighty men, listen, man, go get my wife. And he went in, took her from the young man that Saul gave her to, and brought her back to himself. And she never produced children for David. No kings, no children, or no seed at all came out of Michal because she laid with another man. Did she do it willingly? I'm not saying she did. Her father gave her the man. Her father could have forced, look, you're going to take him because of some league I got with some other nation, whatever have you. But David being, and I'm saying bishop because I'm just using that to say the head of a church or government, he was the husband of his first wife. That thought, I can see that. Now, am I making that argument? Not necessarily so. But Moses was the head of a government, and he was the husband of his first wife. But what if Moses had put Zipporah away and married the Ethiopian wife? Then I would say, according to the rest of the stuff that I put out there, Moses is in direct violation with the Creator, and he could not be, quote, a bishop or a deacon. Deacon meaning servant or helper, or helper or something to that extent, minister, servant. So it could be argued, and I'm just saying I see that sequence of thinking. The bishop or elder must be the husband of his primary or first wife. Now, am I saying that's what Timothy was saying? No. I'm saying I can definitely see that, though, because I can see all of the people who had other wives. David had other wives. I can't say Solomon what his wife's name was, but David had, I think, seven or nine wives and 19 children, but he never got rid of Michal. Look, you can't even produce kids. Get out of here. Bathsheba, the one I committed adultery with, which I shouldn't have done, I should have probably been killed, she produced a King Solomon and other children. Why didn't Michal produce any children? But why did David stay with his first wife? That's interesting to me. I'm just throwing that out there that's interesting to me. Now, aside from that set of thoughts, right? Now, again, I'm throwing it out there. You can tell me what you think about it. I think it's really interesting. aside from that set of thoughts, the bishop being the husband of his first, the bishop being the husband of a singular wife, like, no, he can't have other women, I don't disagree with that. But I would say in terms of, men who dealt with more than one woman, then according to what we read at face value, which I'm still examining, been studying that for a number of years, haven't drawn a full conclusion, then he just can't be a deacon or a bishop. But I would also probably go on record to say it doesn't say he couldn't be a prophet or an evangelist or a priest. Not that you can be like a Levitical priest, but he can follow these other offices. It just say he can't be a bishop or a deacon. Not the deacons. Yeah, just say bishop or deacon. And I don't know. Let me double check because it makes sense. Yeah. So
okay, brother. I was gonna ask my second question as well. I just wanted to say, the word Mia. I saw your point that you're trying to make between Mia and Heist there. That I see that also in Titus when it talks about the one wife as well. It uses the word Mia, but it's also used in the context where the Messiah uses it in many places, talking about if you shall break one of these least commandments, or not one jot or one tittle, or he says not one hair on your head, that's all Mia as well. So I also wanted to ask, so you're saying that if a bishop, then he can have more than one wife. That's what you're saying.
No. I'm not making that argument. I'm saying that I'm still examining that text and the application of it. So I'm saying that if a man was a bishop, I'm saying that that word bishop, number one, does not exist in the New Testament. Does not exist in the Old Testament at all by
a shepherd, a priest, anything like that.
Now, if we transport the word, then I'm going to say Moses is in opposition to this because Moses had more than one wife. If we transport the word, I'm going to say Abraham, which is the father of the faith, is also in violation because he was the head of quite a few people. He had 312 trained men, and I'm going to say that some of the men had wives, and he has a whole village or government that he was over. And then Jacob would also be in violation. And then Jacob, and then David, and then Solomon, if we transport the word. So whatever, maybe, and I don't totally know. I have a lot of books on the New Testament, still studying and drawing out. So I don't know. I do know in Roman culture they were monogamous, and Romans wasn't dealing with, they weren't necessarily dealing with open polygynous marriages, even though they were spreading themselves out to everybody else. So I'm saying definitively, I'm not saying a bishop. So whoever a big famous bishop is, or some local bishop, or whichever, should they have more than one wife? Right now, I'm gonna go with the letter of the text and say no. But I'm also gonna say, if a person doesn't use the word bishop and they say I'm a prophet, am I gonna argue them down because they had over a ministry and you feel? I don't know. I don't know. So I'm not saying that they can. I just find it interesting. Does that make sense, though?
Yes, it does. I appreciate it as well, brother. My second question was, in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 17, it says, neither shall he, referring to the king of Israel, neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away, neither shall he break to himself silver or gold. So, we see text like in 2 Samuel chapter 3, where it says David, that he married his first wife and his second wife and his third wife and his fourth wife and his sixth wife and so forth. And so my question to you is, when it says multiply wives, how many wives are you thinking that a man can have? And here in this situation with the king, is David in violation of the law here, in having having at least 7 wives here?
Oh, to answer that about David, I'll look at Leviticus But first, just for sequence purposes, I think I would want to look at 1 Samuel. Is it 1 Samuel chapter 12, I believe? Just for sequence purposes. This is 1 Samuel. It should be 12, if I'm not mistaken. 1 Samuel 12. No, it's not that. Maybe it's 2 Samuel 12. It might be 8. 2 Samuel 8. It's like 8 and 12 or 12 and 8.
Or what are you looking for as well?
No. Oh, yeah, 2 Samuel 12. Yeah, 2 Samuel 12. And I'll start reading at verse 4. Or maybe, if you don't mind, if you can pick it up at verse 5.
It says, and David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to Nathan, as the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this thing shall surely die, and he shall restore
he told me about
lamb.
the example of whoever took one man's sheep. The man had a whole bunch of sheep. Whoever took the man who only had one sheep, and then, David was like, man, let that man die. Okay, keep going, sorry.
And he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. And Nathan said to David, thou art the man. Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul, and I gave thee thy master's house, and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have moreover given unto thee such and such things. Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord, to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and thou hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now,
all right,
therefore,
so I'm going to pause there. So what I read in this, and you can tell me if you can see the same thing, in 12 and 8, he said, I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel. And if any of that was too little, I would have given you more. So one of the things that I see here is that if he wanted more, let's say wives, he would have given them to David. That's what I'm reading there, right? And I'll say one of the reasons why I'm reading that. When I go into 1 Chronicles chapter, or maybe 2 Chronicles chapter 2, and I'll go back to Leviticus after I make this point to say what I see in that Leviticus. When I go to 2 Chronicles chapter 2, in verse 13, it talks about Abijah, which was one of David's sons. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to just kind of get to my point. Abijah was the king. In 2 Chronicles chapter 13, and I'm going to read, I'm just going to skip down to the point and read verse 21. But Abijah, or Abijah, waxed mighty and married 14 wives and begot 22 sons and 16 daughters. And the rest of the acts of Abijah and his ways that were written in the story of the prophet Edo. So from my understanding, Abijah was also a king. He had 14 wives, 22 children. So when I go back to Deuteronomy, you went back to Leviticus chapter 17, I would juxtapose or compare that text with two different things. One, Nathan the prophet told David the king, if you wanted more wives through the mouth of the Almighty, I would have gave you more. And, houses or whatever else you wanted. So it wasn't really the fact that you couldn't have more, because you've been multiplying wives basically since you left Michael. It wasn't just that. You shouldn't have just took Uriah's wife because she was married to another husband. Second is Abijah had more than one wife, and he was a king. So these are two examples that I'm pulling so far. The difference between them two and Solomon Solomon multiplied wives to the point that he went a-whoring after other deities of other nations. Now, just kind of like what we did with the word Mia, which, I wanted to make a brief comment on afterward. When I look up the word multiply, now I'm already contextualizing first that the King David was told by Nathan the prophet through the mouth of the Almighty, man, if you wanted more wives, I would have gave you that. You had no business going to take that man's wife. Like, how did he get Abigail? Well, man, her husband died. Cool, she fair game. But you just shouldn't have took another man's wife. So that was the problem. But the word multiply in Leviticus, was that 17? Deuteronomy 17:17 is and I'm making a point first with the text, but I just want to look at 72:35 in the Hebrew. I think I looked it up in time past and it seemed to clarify what it was talking about. So I'm not under the impression that a king just can't multiply wives. I don't think that that's the point that was being made. It was 72:35. In 72:35.
Look for that scripture. Let me jump in real quick before you jump.
Okay.
Look for that scripture. 716. I do see you. I know you're standing by. I'm going to get to you. And for the rest of everybody else listening to the show, again, it's press number 1 if you already called in. We still have like 46 minutes on the air. We have 46 minutes on the air. So if you have any further questions, just stand by. We're going to get to you. Once again, the number is 319-527-6239 for those that's on social media. That's listening via Blog Talk Radio. The number is 319-527-6239. Make sure you press number 1 if you got a question or a comment. I'm sorry, continue.
Okay, so that 72:35 Rabbah, it says a primary root to increase in whatever respect, bring in abundance, archer by mistake, and it gives a few other words. It says to enlarge, excel, exceeding, be full of, to multiply, to nourish. I'm just reading some of them. More in number, to yield. And I think what I read out of that Deuteronomy chapter 17, and again, I could be wrong. I'm just throwing out there what I understand out of that. I don't think the Creator had a problem with the king multiplying wives in and of itself. I think that what he was pointing was the very next thing he said after that, Deuteronomy 17:17, where he says, 17:17, neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn away. So multiplying wives in and of itself, we see that David was able to do that, and the Creator said, look, man, I gave you your master's wives. You would have had more if you wanted it. That is not really like a problem. But that it turned his heart away, nor shall he multiply himself silver and gold. David had so much money meaning whatever medium that he used for money, that Solomon didn't need for anything when it came down to build the temple. It was all stored up. David just couldn't build the temple. He was at war all the time. His hands was bloody. But he multiplied wives. Creator said, no problem, I would have gave you more. But none of his wives took his heart away because, as the text says, his heart was perfect all the days of his life. Solomon, on the other hand, well, you got a little idol, man. You start worshiping the deities of Egypt and Cush and Dagon, and so you start building temples. David never dealt with that. So I think what I'm reading out of that is if a king is multiplying so many wives that it took his heart away, that's the problem, not just writing it. Because David also multiplied silver and gold and stored it up, and he built his own house. And the report is his house was extremely nice to the point where he got jealous for the Creator. Was like, man, I'm over here living in this ivory house with all these lions around me. I got to build a God of creation house. So that's my thought on that.
Hey, yeah, I definitely appreciate it, brother, and I can see that definitely within the law. We see that it's permissible for a man to have more than one wife. In that context, and everything you said was pretty clear. I appreciate the answers. I'll just say I do think it's interesting. I'm actually Eliyahu, brother Bishop Eliyahu, and
okay.
peace unto you. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with a ministry, IGIC Knoxville, and I just wanted to say as well, brother, we do kind of see through the prophets. I think it's interesting how God did make one woman. He didn't make more than one woman. You know, when he took out the rib from Adam's side, you know, he could have made him 2 or 3 wives, right? Because, you know, it would have been, of course, more of a helpmeet. So I do think it's interesting that he actually made one woman in the beginning for Adam. I think it's interesting, you know, because the prophet Malachi, when he talks about the fact of why did God make one, he said basically so there might be a godly seed. And he talks about not dealing treacherously with the wife of your youth. So, you know, like the wife of your youth is your first love, you know, the first woman you meet. And there is a lot of things within the law where you look at the priest, and the priest would take a virgin, you know, this would be the wife of their youth. And there was a lot of different circumstances around, you know, the kind of woman they could marry. So there was standards or different standards for certain classes of men or different offices you would see in the kind of woman they unto themselves, which I think is interesting. And in Matthew that you brought up earlier, where Christ was appealing back, saying, you know, in the beginning it was not so, but basically he had made them male and female. You know, I'm seeing that as him going back to that fact of, you know, there's one man and one woman, you know, in the beginning. So I don't see him teaching against the law either, but I do see that there is, you know, a glorification of that throughout the scriptures in different places, which I don't have time to bring out. But I do appreciate your answers, brother, with that. And, you know, God bless you and your household.
Yeah, hallelujah. I just wanted to throw one more thought out there. While I had you on the line.
I just say this as well because, you know, even in the Proverbs, it says, I believe, the prophecy of the mother, and I think chapter 31 said, you know, don't give your strength unto many women and things like this. And we do see with David and all the men you brought up, you know, this multiplication of wives was very taxing. And, you know, even when we see the patriarchs, you know, with like Rachel, Leah, and all these different things, we see like with Jacob and different things, in that situation, we see that, you know, he wanted one woman. He really loved one. In the law, we see if a man loved one woman over another. So, you know, there's all these difficulties that come into play. And a lot of those things are deadened when you just have a relationship, one man and one woman, and can love each other and have confidence in each other. So I definitely do see that there's a lot of things that appeal to that within the scriptures as well. And I appreciate it, brother.
Right, hallelujah. I was going to share feedback on that, one of those thoughts, which was in a general sense, yeah, that a lot of that can be applicable. So I don't necessarily believe that every man in Israel was monogamous, and I don't believe that every man in Israel was polygynous. But one of the things I was going to point out earlier is there are cases that allow for a man to be with another woman. For example, when you look at Deuteronomy, I think 25 in the Torah, where it says that if a man be live in, you know, proximity to his brother, and his brother didn't have a seed, then he shall raise up a child to his brother. Now, I'm going to go on record to say, as an example, this is Deuteronomy 25:5. If brethren dwell together and one of them die, having no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take unto him to wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her. And it shall be when she beareth the firstborn. Now, that firstborn, when I look it up, deals his son, that his name may not be put out of Israel. So hypothetically speaking, you know, man is married, his brother's wife, his brother dies and he doesn't bear children. He lays with his wife and she has 5 girls, and he still hasn't born a son. And Deuteronomy is saying you take that woman to wife, not just to lay with her, now he's also taking care of her. And that's one of the cases that the Creator was saying is permissible, that a man will lay with a woman is not going to be considered fornication. You got to raise up seed to your brother. What if she had 9 straight daughters? So, man, I've been dealing with this woman for a straight decade, and she still have not produced a son yet. And then she finally produces a son. So I think that, you know, in one sense, there are...
Oh, yeah, definitely, brother. We see this levirate marriage law going all the way back into Genesis as well.
Right. And I think that there are points. I think when it deals with the oneness of the people, I think Yeshua said, "You may be one as I am one," and I think he used that same Greek word "mia." And when he said that one, like he's talking to a group of 12 people or 70 people or 100 people, saying we all one. So I think in the Bereshit or the Genesis, everything derived from one, whether it was one literal scientific Adam or male and female, he made them being one man, and he split the man into woman, and he wanted everything to start from one. I think it's a point that he's exaggerating.
He said, be fruitful and multiply. Yeah.
Right. So, I definitely agree. And, the reason I was pointing out those things about whether the bishop, I'm still examining that. But if a person is a bishop, I'm not going to be the first in line and be like, hey, man, get 4 wives. But, I know people who claim themselves to be pastors or bishops, and that's what they do. I'm not going to play around with the terminology.
Yeah, I just wanted to see your perspective on the deacons and the bishops according to Timothy and Titus, and also about that multiplicity of wives for the kings of Israel. Considering that those of us who believe in the new covenant, and even those in Exodus chapter 19, believe we're going to be a nation of kings and priests, and we see those different stipulations in the law with kings, different stipulations in the law with priests. We see these stipulations with the deacons, with the elders, with the bishops. So I just wanted to see your perspective on it, and I think you did an excellent job at answering the questions.
Hallelujah. Appreciate you again, sir. Bishop Eliyahu.
All right, family. Once again, the number is 319-527-6239. We still have more time. We have like 35 minutes on the air, family. We have 35 minutes on the air. We're opening the phone lines for the family that's tuning in via social media, that's calling in via phone or via Skype. Again, if you already called in, simply press number 1. I will add you in the conversation. If you're on social media, you got to dial that number, 319-527-6239, and then press number 1, and we'll add you in the conversation. 403, I see you. We're gonna get to you real soon. But let's go to 716-833. You're live.
Thank you for taking my call, Sal, and I'd like to thank your guest tonight. I'd like to beg his pardon because I came in a little late, but I would imagine that you did touch on Exodus 20 and 14, where it says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery."
Yes, I did. But with that in mind, what did you mean when you used the word adultery?
Okay, because it says "thou shalt not." Now, it didn't say a woman or a man. It just says "thou," right? Thou shalt not. He didn't specify, right. But that's not my question. Now, we know that adultery is not limited, you know what I mean, to like just outside of marriage, right? Like you said, it was homosexuality, bestiality, and all those things, right? And I know the sister called in and asked about fornication. Now, to my understanding, fornication would be like premarital sex. Now, if I was married and if I slept with somebody who wasn't married, I would be an adulteress, but that person would be a fornicator. And what I really wanted to say is when I came in on the call, I was hearing like, a double standard regarding, the men can commit adultery and the women couldn't. And I don't agree with that because we have a passage in John 8:3-1 where the woman was caught in the very act, and they wanted her stoned. Jesus would not stone her because the man wasn't there. So that lets me know right there that there is equality. You understand?
In a sense, I do. So my question to you is, when you look at Numbers chapter 12, Moses, who was married to Zipporah, in Numbers 12:1, it says, "And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, or he had married an Ethiopian woman. Now, when we read a little ways back, Zipporah was not the Ethiopian woman who Moses had married. So Moses was already married to Zipporah, and she was a Midianite, and her father was Jethro or Reguel or Ruel, and that was his first wife. Then somewhere, if you read different historical texts, it'll paint out who the Ethiopian woman was or whatever. I'm not dealing with those. Here in Numbers chapter 12 and 1, Miriam and Aaron got upset with Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. Now, would you conclude that Moses was an adulterer because he slept with another woman that he married here?
Well, you just said that he didn't marry her.
No, he did. It says in Numbers 12 and 1, it says he did marry her. Moses married an Ethiopian woman.
And then I would have to ask, did the first wife die?
Right. So this is an interesting point, and I'm going to say this, but it's going to take examination to examine and look at. If a married man cohabitates with a woman that is married or engaged or betrothed, then that married man is an adulterer. If a single man cohabitates with a woman that's engaged, married, or betrothed, that man is an adulterer. If a married man cohabitates with a single woman that is not married, engaged, or betrothed, he is not an adulterer. And the text back that up in various ways. So adultery is specific to gender. Adultery is not uniform, like, oh, I got a husband and he slept with, Michelle down the street. He committed adultery on me. No. If that woman wasn't engaged, betrothed, or married, he did not commit adultery. You may not have liked it, but he didn't commit adultery. And the reason I'm saying that is because a little earlier we looked at the causes that a woman can put away her husband for, and none of those causes included him laying with another woman. Now, if she was married, in the case that you quoted in the New Testament where they caught the woman in the very act, that woman was married. She can't cohabitate with any other man beside her husband. A man doesn't have those same restrictions. And yes,
but that's not true, because if that's the case, then they would have stoned the woman right then and there, right?
Well, she was married. They caught her in the very act.
Okay, but adultery is still punishable back then. I mean, I'm just saying she was supposed to have been stoned with your premises that only the man can do it. But Christ showed that it was equality.
That's not my premise. No, that's not my premise. My premise is that that man, and I'll show you a couple of texts to point that out. That man that laid with that woman that was betrothed or engaged to a husband or married committed adultery because she was married. If she was not married,
I want to stay with the New Testament. See, I understand, and that is written what you're saying, but we're talking about adultery. We're not talking about before they get married or after. You know what I mean? I'm talking about this particular verse where that woman should have been stoned because men can do it and women can't.
Yeah, so that I don't think I can separate the New and Old Testament to answer that question. I'm just saying there's nowhere that – say that again? I don't want – you can't do that. No, there's no way you could do that. Yeah, I think you made a statement like I'm talking about in the New Testament. That woman was married, just like when you look at, let's say, Matthew chapter 1. In Matthew chapter 1, it says, this is 1:18. This is New Testament, the same point that I'm making. Now, the birth of Yeshua, Jesus, was on this wise. When his mother, Mary, was espoused to Joseph, before they came together, or before they had sex, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privately. But while he thought on these things, behold, the angel of the Lord came to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, thou son of David, fear not to take thy wife because of, the Holy Spirit. She's conceived of the Holy Spirit. Well, what would have made her have committed adultery here? She was engaged to be married. Or, as the text says, she was married, because the Bible uses betrothal and engaged the same way. So it doesn't permission her to go cohabitate with anybody at all. The same
her or him, right?
No,
both, right?
The restrictions, it is a double standard, so to speak. There aren't restrictions on a husband the same way the restrictions are on a wife. And the reason I pulled out Moses as an example, David had 9 wives, Abigail had 19 or 22 wives, Moses had 2 wives, Jacob had Elkanah, Hannah's or Samuel's mother, had 2 wives. None of these men were considered adulterers. Now, I don't think that they were adulterers. They weren't adulterers in the Old Testament, and then once the New Testament, they busted. They were all adulterers. Nope. A man can cohabitate with a woman if he's married, as long as he's not cohabitating with a married woman or that's engaged. You don't find that in the text.
And
when you do
Leviticus 10:20-10 says, and the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, and the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death.
What if he wasn't married? What if she wasn't married?
No, we can't do that wife. Now. I can't.
No.
I really appreciate you.
No, hold on. We actually have to do that. It says, if he committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, or if he lay with his neighbor's wife, what if she's not married? You have to. I
can't do with it. That's hypothetical, sir. I can't do that.
Right. Then you can't swing the pendulum the other way either. You can't say, well,
I
hey,
didn't.
he laid with her.
Leviticus swung it. No, all I did was just call to say that I was hearing a double standard, and just for, my sisters out there, I mean, when you read the passage about the woman that got caught in adultery, and the only reason why we know that she was married because it used the word adultery, right? But she did not get stoned because the man was not present. So therefore, that is equality right there. I mean, he takes sexual sins very seriously. He's not going to say, oh, well, the man can sin and I'll give him a pass. Sir, don't teach that.
No. I think that you're kind of mistaken what's being said. I'm saying go to Exodus 22. You have to say if the woman was not married, because the Torah says if the woman was not married. Here would be an example, Exodus 22:16. If a man entice a maid that is not betrothed, she's not engaged, she's not married, and lie with her, he have sex with her, he shall surely endow her to be what? His wife. If she's married, that man has committed a crime. Go to Deuteronomy 22:22. If he's if all of the cases that you're bringing up are talking about a married woman. If she's not married, then he is obligated to take her to be his wife. If she's not married, he didn't commit adultery. I don't care if he had 1 wife or 4 wives.
Then what is she if he didn't want to take her for his wife?
Well, her father could refuse and he could not take her.
What would she be labeled as?
Well, the text would label her a couple of different things. One is that if her father refused, he would pay a dowry according to virgins, meaning she hadn't laid with anybody at all. Now, when her father decided to give her to another man, maybe of his choice, he has to disclose that she's not a virgin. Some other man laid with her. I didn't plan on that. And then if the guy wants to take her, whatever have you. But what did they do? Because he didn't go to the father and get permission, that was sexual immorality. He didn't have a right to lay with her until he married her first.
So anything that's premarital sex is fornication?
That's one of the types of fornication, yes.
Okay. What's the other?
Oh, incest is a type, bestiality is a type, homosexuality is a type, adultery is a type.
Oh, well, Right. We said that earlier from Exodus where it says thou shalt not. And I was just saying that it didn't specify gender. You know what I mean? So I don't know if you guys get a pass or not. That's all I'm saying.
No, so like when you say pass, I still think that you're dealing with the emotions of it and not dealing with the reality of it. So when the text says in Deuteronomy chapter 17, I'm just using this as an example, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. There's not a text that says thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's husband. Why?
So it's universal, right? I mean, you can flip it.
No, I'm not saying that it is universal. You have biblical evidence that men laid with other women and married other women when they were already married. David was married to Michal, and then he took Abigail's, Nabal's wife after Nabal died. There was no.
So what was David? Then what was him? What was he doing? All of that. What would you label him as?
A married man, married to multiple wives. Now, if a woman did that, she was an adulterer, and that's what the Bible
this is what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. When you say that it's a double standard because men get away with it and women be called tramps, or whatever.
Well, So, and this is why I'm asking, and I have to digress so we can probably move on to another caller. One, I'm asking for you to do a diligent study on the word adultery. And if you look in not just the dictionary, if you look in a good Bible dictionary, it will say exactly what I'm saying. If a married
immorality.
No, I'm saying
immorality.
Adultery. No,
immorality,
not
sexual.
No, not fornication. I said adultery. I'm saying if a married man cohabitates with a married or engaged woman, he is an adulterer. If a single man commits and cohabitates or sleeps with a woman that's engaged or married, he is an adulterer. If that man is married and he goes and takes a virgin or a woman that's not betrothed to a man and take her, he entices her to be a maid, he shall take her to be his wife. That's it. Women don't have that capacity to do. This is what Jesus pointed out that we looked at a little earlier. So, you probably have to definitely take a deeper study of it, but you don't find any cases, and maybe you can point it out. But I can show you. We just looked at David.
I just thought that you could only. I thought that you could only use adultery if they were married. I'm sorry.
No, let me make this one last point. Moses had 2 wives. Jacob had 4 wives. David had more than 2 wives. Can you name any woman in the Bible who had more than one husband simultaneously that was not considered an adulterer?
Why should I have to? I'm just saying. You already just
made
mentioned
my
the
point.
fact
it's
that it's
adultery.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I just thought that maybe since the woman didn't get stoned right then and there, that it was equality.
No. That's a deeper matter, which, I'll just go on record to say, if they would have brought the man and a woman, she would have been stoned to death, and he would have been stoned also.
So there is no double standard then?
I'm saying she was married to a husband, and I think I pointed that out clearly, and I want to give space for the next person to call. We can probably pick up a dialogue if you're interested.
Thank you.
But you definitely have to research that.
I appreciate you.
Okay.
No, thank you so much.
Okay, no problem.
All right, family, once again, this debate talk for you, marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Elder Moses is presenting this information to the masses out there. Again, feel free to call in. You know the number by now, 319-527-6239. Once you call in, simply press number 1 and we'll add you to the conversation. We only have 19 minutes on the air, so make sure you call in if you have a question or comment. Or you can email your questions at debatetalkforyou@gmail.com. That's debatetalk, the number 4, letter U, @gmail.com. All right, let's go to 403-888. You're live.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, Sel. My name is Brian. I've called in a couple of times in the past. Thank you for taking my call, Elder Moses. I just want to make a couple of comments, offer a few thoughts, and then see what your thoughts are on them. First of all, the gal that was the lady who was just talking. There definitely was a double standard in the Old Testament, in the Old Covenant, for there were different rules for men and women. The New Testament suggests that the standard has changed so that we are equal, because the St. Paul says that there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, free nor slave. So essentially, in the eyes of God, men and women are equal, and I think that the marriage rules seem to be identical for both parties now. So I just wanted to offer that thought. Going back to, and this is going back to the sister that was talking earlier, and she wanted a description of what exactly is fornication. Sometimes it's easy to confuse what we might call sexual immorality and actual fornication, and both are proscribed as sinful for Christians. So, for example, fornication is what you might call a more serious sin, fornication and adultery, because these defile the flesh and they break the marriage. Other things like even flirting with someone of the opposite sex in a too profusely, masturbation, things of this, they are still sexual immorality. They're below the standard that the scriptures give for us. So there is a difference, but one is more serious. You can be prescribed by the ecclesia for fornication, but probably masturbation, a person would receive counsel from an elder. I did want to mention too, Brother Moses or Elder Moses, that the overall standard that we would try to ascribe to or reach is the singular relationship between God and the nation of Israel. That's the standard. And when fornication or adultery is spoken of in the relationship between God and the nation of Israel, it's the figure of speech is taken. The fornication is the sin, and it's spiritualized for the relationship of Israel going after other gods. Now, God himself would not go after another nation. He had chosen Israel. The only one that sinned in the relationship was Israel going after other gods. So that divine picture of Israel being married to Yahweh is what ultimately we would try to attain to in the earthly realm, in our lives as well. And it was a divine pattern for us. Yes, please.
Can I jump in there? And you can also just let me know if you had a direct question. But the ideal of so God was married to Israel, and that was his chosen people. But then he began to take other nations, and I think that would kind of signify the point that I was making earlier, where he had the right to take other nations. So any other nation that joined himself. Well, he's in Isaiah. He said, the strangers that call upon my name, or I think it's Ephesians or Romans, it said, in Acts chapter 10, verse 34, he says that God is not a respecter of persons, and that all nations that call upon him have the right to him, right? So if any nation wants to pledge fidelity to him, then he'll take them unto himself to be his people also. Now, is he in a primary relationship with Israel?
It wouldn't be a second wife. It wouldn't be a second wife. They would just corporately be included in
so I'm clear. Like, what I began to deal with is marriage, remarriage, and divorce. And I said this when I started out. What I'm not here to talk about is whether you can be religious or not, whether Old Testament, New Testament. That is not my point. So I don't mind answering questions about it.
Right.
I want to answer the questions and move on. But if this turns into a show about polygyny, we'd be here all night. And I will thoroughly exhaust myself.
It does tend to
validate that people can do
migrate towards that. Yes.
Yeah. Now that wasn't my point for it too, but And the second thing I just wanted to say is that this is just where the text is showing. There is still no text in the Old or New Testament that allows a woman to put away her husband. Now, or a man without a just cause, right? So wife can't put away her husband. But the text says that, this is 1 Corinthians 7, that let not the 1 Corinthians 7 and 10, but unto the married command I, yet not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband. But, and if she depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband, and let not the husband put away her wife. The other text would say, the wife is bound by her husband so long as he liveth. Now, I'm necessarily going to argue there is no text that says that for a man, that he's bound to one single woman. It's just not there. Now, whether we want to debate it or not, it's not there. And I'm saying that the patriarchs and others didn't follow that same thing, and it was set up to be very prescriptive for a woman. Old Testament, New Testament. But also, did you have a question? Because I wanted to see if there were a direct question also.
No, I just wanted to mention the only thing, and then I'll mute myself after that, that I think that the overseers spoken of in the New Testament, I don't think we can really equate them as being analogous to the positions of authority in the Old Testament. The offices of overseer or bishop and deacon or minister are new offices that were created in Paul's ecclesias. So they're not the same thing as the fact of the matter is that polygamy was allowed in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament we're migrating away from it. That's all I kind of wanted to say, and thank you for letting me offer those comments.
Right, no problem. And I'll just say a couple of things as Saul works to take the next caller. Whether polygyny was accepted in the Old Testament, New Testament, really, again, was not my point to debate. But what allows a person to be married, what allows a person to put away his wife or husband, and then what allows them to remarry was my primary point. Because people live in America for the most part, they tend to argue polygyny based upon what's in America. If the scripture says that it's permissible across the world, I'm not holding an American argument for a world across the world, like, nationwide or globally. So I don't hold that argument. What the New Testament says, and nor do I find that in the Old Testament people were called bishops. So what I said was that the position of Moses being the head of a government or a group of people was the same thing as a bishop in principle, the same thing as a king. The principle is akin, maybe on a micro, macro level. But the position, even though it be magnified by more people, is the exact same thing. In principle, you're head of a government. That's pretty much it, whether the local a bishop generally is the head over like 4 churches or 5 churches or multiple churches. Moses was the head over multiple groups of 50 or 100 or 1,000. So, in principle, that's the same thing. Another comment that you made about masturbation or fornication, I'm just going on record to say there's no text that says if a person does this, they're committing a sin. Text doesn't say it. I don't say it. I just don't jump out there and say, well, it feels wrong. You shouldn't be doing it because what? And then people generally pull out if a man looks after a woman or lust after her, and they contort that. If a man looks after a married woman to be sexually aroused and desire a married woman, then that is what Christ was talking about. If that woman isn't married, I don't hold that argument. Because when I met my wife and when I began to desire her or like her or find her attractive, lust meaning to desire, she was attractive. Right? So people hold these arguments that the text itself, examine closely, is not holding. But I'll turn it back over to Sal if you want to take the next call if there's any more.
All right, nobody else is pressing number 1 at this time. Again, the number is 319-527-6239. I think I do have an email there for you. And once again, the email is debatetalkforyou@gmail.com. Let me see here. Yep, I have an email. It says, are you able to clarify to the audience 2018 Some say you'll have to go down to the justice of the peace, get the paperwork, and that in the eyes of Yah will make it an official marriage. Others would say when two people commit to one another and then have intercourse, that's another form of marriage. Break it down for us. Which one is it?
Can you repeat the first part of the question, if you would?
All right. It says,
Sorry, you're breaking up.
Well,
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think I may have got the gist of the question. Was it a person, like a single person getting married, and then what qualifies as marriage?
Like marriage there's going down to get married, fornication, or intercourse, and for some that's a form of marriage. Which one is it, pretty much?
Oh, so if I go back and I think. Can
you hear me clear though? Can you hear me clear now?
Yeah, now I can. Now I can.
All right, so let me read it. Let me read it again. Let me read it again.
Okay.
So let me read it while it's clear. All right, hold on. It says, are you able to clarify to the audience what marriage is today in 2018? Some say you'd have to go down to the justice of peace, paperwork, and that in the eyes of Yah will make an official marriage. Others would say when two people commit to one another and then have intercourse, that's another form of marriage. Break it down for us. Which one is it?
Oh, so I'll answer that a couple of different ways, and hopefully it all points in the same direction. First, when I generally reason the scriptures, I don't reason based upon America. I just don't think that that's prudent. So when I'm in Ethiopia or in Czechoslovakia or in Haiti, then what I'm going to use a different set of rules for them? Probably so. I mean, maybe, but maybe not. So I try to take a more global approach to that answer. In one sense, and I want to be liberal in saying this, but in one sense, you read Exodus 22:16. If a man entice a maid that is not betrothed, so this young woman is a maid or virgin and she's not married, or I'm just going to say, just for argument's sake, that maybe she's not a virgin, but she's still just not married to anybody in today's standard because of different things, and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. So he already laid with her. He enticed her. He shall surely endow her to be his wife. So if he had to endow her to be his wife, she's not his wife. So I think that's, to me, pretty cut and dry. So some people get into common law marriage. Everybody doesn't do a justice of the peace or a marriage certificate across the world. So I've been in Dominican Republic talking to Haitians in a small village, and they may not go through all of those formalities, but they may hold a public ceremony in front of witnesses and make vows to themselves. In America, I'd probably tell you according to Romans 13, like, okay, if they say go down and get a certificate, then go down and get a certificate. There's other cases, and this is the complexity of marriage. So there's cases where, and this is exaggerating my point, but you have a man who is from Iraq who comes to America with two wives. Okay, well, he can't get a certificate here for both of them. Is he not married to both of them? See, I'm not going to hold that argument, right? So when I think of marriage, it's a lot of complexities behind it. But if you are in the United States and have the capacity to follow a protocol by first going to go get your license, second go and such and such, then go do that. Okay, if you decide to, okay, we're not going to get a license in America, we're going to get one in Canada, then do that. You're going to get married in Canada, do that. If you want to go to another country, then do that. I think that you can do that. But I would first say, in terms of the answer to the question, if two people cohabitate, they are not betrothed, or they cohabitate, he shall surely endow her to be his wife. And she is not his wife just because they cohabitated. I don't hold that argument.
All right, we have another caller standing by. We have 2 minutes, though, left on the air, so we definitely go into the overtime part of the show. If you want to check that part of the show out live, you're going to have to call in. The number is 319-527-6239. Again, we only have 2 minutes left on the air live. If you want to hear the rest of the show, you're going to have to call in. 319-527-6239. We're going into the overtime portion and take some more of your calls and pretty much get some last words after from Elder Moses. You can always go to the description box for those who want to reach out. If you have any further questions, go to the description box and you'll see all the information below. All right, so let's go to 865-282. You're live. (865-282). Can you hear me? You're live.
Hey, shalom. This is Bishop Eliyahu. Yeah, I just wanted to call in behind Brian there. It irks me a little when people address things later. And he actually said that bishop and deacon, those were actually new founded offices in the churches of Paul and things like this. And we know that James, the leader of the Church of Jerusalem, like he was a shepherd or a bishop or what we would call a pastor. And I think that people lose a lot of things in the language when we have these Latin words, when we have these English words, when we have these Greek words, when we have these Hebrew words. And I see an attempt to go back to the Hebrew a lot or to try to fix in on one thing, and that's just a mistake that people make. When you look at what people would sometimes call the fivefold ministry in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11, and it says, and he gives some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and some teachers. These are offices you can find within the Tanakh, and you can find all these different things. And bishop is just a pastor or a shepherd. And you see that in Jeremiah, the pastors of God's flock. And in the New Covenant, you'd have rabbis or rabbim. But anyway, the masters of Israel, the teachers of Israel, the priests, which teach and things of this nature. But I just wanted to bring up something to the brother here, dealing with the way the Apostle Paul was stating certain things within the New Covenant. And because I noticed earlier when he was reading 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he kind of skipped over where it said, the wife hath not power over her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power over his own body, but the wife. I think it's interesting that within 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and also Ephesians chapter 5, that it always refers to the man having a wife as singular, not like if a man care for his wives, or it always refers to if a man care for his wife. And I want to read one of those examples for you, brother, in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 31. I just wanted to see your take on it. It says, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. So I just think it's interesting that a lot of the times it mentions it in the singular, and I just wanted to ask you, my question is, can you think of a place where it mentions the plurality within the New Covenant text, where it's, if a man has, he should love his wives, plural, or if a man has wives, plural? I would want to know if you have that text, because you seem to have a lot of knowledge on the subject.
Oh, well, I will try, and I'll try to say first is that, again, like the intent of this show and teaching it had nothing to do with polygyny. Like when you talk about marriage, you have to bring that into the context of the conversation. Primarily for the sake of,
I apologize. I agree with you that a woman can't divorce her husband. I heard that being brought up earlier, and I just wanted to say I agree with that. She can't give him a bill of divorcement and separate from him. We see all the examples that you brought up. You brought up the evidence for it. You show very concrete within the scripture that that's so. So I just noticed that was, I don't mean to get you off topic, and you really don't have to answer your question if you don't want to, brother.
No, I'll answer it. But, I mean, would you also conclude that a woman couldn't cohabitate with multiple men at any point in the scripture?
Well, we always know that the woman's underneath her head, whether it be her father or her husband. And that's also, Brian, that's why I want to say as well, Brian was wrong. He said within the new covenant we see an equality. Within the new covenant we see the same system where it's the headship. And we see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 with the man being the head of the woman. Just like his children are not equal to him, his wife is not equal with him in certain capacities. The equality that he was trying to bring up in the text of the Apostle Paul or St. Paul when it said there's neither male nor female, Jew or Greek or all this, that's talking about inheritance. It's talking about us going into the kingdom of God, receiving eternal life. And eternal life and the resurrection of the dead, that. Yeah, go ahead, brother.
No, I was just saying it probably took me a while to kind of dialogue with Brian and straighten out, different issues. But, when for me, if I'm presenting on this and he started talking about oneness and that's not really what I'm dealing with. But I think when you bring up, I think the young sister or the sister called in and said it's a double standard. There is nowhere at all in the text, Torah, New Testament, Tanakh, Old, New, Middle, Apocrypha, that a woman can cohabitate with multiple men and not be committed adultery. Whether she's engaged, betrothed, or harlot, it was always profane for her. There are cases on the opposite end, and I had to bring that out in the context of dealing with marriage, divorce, and remarriage. I had to bring that out for that specific purpose. Now, for the question that you asked, and Ephesians, so again, I'll go on record to say that I'm not pointing out and don't believe that I can point out a particular text that says his multiple wives in the New Testament, which again really wasn't my point. But what I will say is when you look at John chapter 17, you see this singular plural concept juxtaposed a couple times. So John 17, and I would start at verse 15. I pray not that thou shouldest take them, plural, out of the world, but that thou shouldest keep them, plural, from evil. They, plural, are not of the world, even as I, singular, am not of the world. Sanctify them through thy truth. Down to verse 20. Neither pray I for these alone, but for them also which shall believe on me through their word, that they all may be one, singular, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. And the glory which thou gavest me, I have given them, that they may be one, even as we are one. So when I'm looking at, and again, this was not to talk about polygyny. That wasn't my point. But when I'm looking at the plurality of it, if David was married to Bathsheba and married to Abigail, the two are one flesh. Him and Bathsheba is one, and then him and Abigail is one, and him and whoever his other wives are. I don't look at it as saying like, no, these two singular people are coalesced or congealed into one single body. That's not the way I take it. Just the way I don't look at that the Creator is only married to Israel. No, he said any nation. When they left Egypt, it was a mixed multitude. Now his priority apparently was the nation of Israel. That's why the whole scripture is written. But then he took other nations and people from other nations and said, look, you can marry me too and get the benefits of it. But again, I'm not getting into that as a construct to validate or incriminate polygyny. But when you open up that can of worms and people talking about it's a double standard, she committed adultery, and guys can go around, people start imagining the worst. I'm saying in the scripture it existed. I had to bring that out in the context of marriage, and because of that, it's brought out. But I don't. Even in Corinthians, I wasn't necessarily like skipping over it intentionally. It just didn't deal with the point that I was dealing with. So, example, if David, who was married to Abigail, he had power over her body. She couldn't go lay with another wife. Jacob, who was married to 4 wives, Reuben lay with one of his concubines. Well, she didn't have power over her own body to go lay with Reuben. You my wife. Now, I can go lay with Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah, but Reuben and Bilhah, or I think whoever Reuben lay with, you can't lay with none of mine because they one with me, whether singularly or collectively, just as Yeshua was pointing out, I and them and they and me. But again, just, out of regard and respect, I wanted to
let me ask
point
you a
out,
question while I have you.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you another question while I have you on here, brother, because you're very knowledgeable about the subject.
I'm going to take your number, man. I'm coming down to Tennessee. I'll be down the next Sabbath. Hallelujah. No, go ahead.
Hey, man, all praise be to the Most High, brother. Do you think that maybe this multiplicity was brought in according to the curse? I don't know how far your studies go, but in, Genesis chapter 3, it says in verse 16, let me start at verse 16. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. We see that that's part of what was introduced after the woman had sinned. As well, when we look in 1 Peter chapter 3, it says, even Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters ye are, as long as ye do well, and are not afraid with any amazement. So we see there that he's telling them to be subject unto their own husbands. And we see that also within the church of Jesus Christ, within the nation of Israel, we see very clearly that it's in congregational settings and different atmospheres, it's commanded for them not even to speak because they're subjected or under subject to their husbands, as also saith the law, him referring back to Genesis in that situation. And so I agree with you with the points that you made with the cohabitation. By that, a woman can't take upon herself multiple partners, whereas we do see in the scripture very plainly that a man takes on these multiple partners. But I just wanted to ask you, do you equate that with being part of the curse on the woman? I know that the Apostle Paul, he says something as well in 1 Timothy. I want to read this, and it's in chapter 2 and verse 12. It says, But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was first formed, then Eve, and Adam, so Adam is, before her. And in this, he has preeminence and dominion over her. And it says in verse 14, And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in transgression. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith and charity and holiness with sobriety. And so I think it's interesting that, this woman, in reference to Genesis. So I just wanted to, see your thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah, and I think if I'm gauging your question correctly, when you say the multiplicity, what directly were you referring to?
No, I agree with the complex unity you were talking about earlier. I agree with the complex unity you were talking about earlier when you said, one can refer to, a group of, things being in unity. I understand that. But no, I was just asking specifically because I don't have any qualms with what you just said about that. What I was asking specifically, which was a little, which is different than that, is about Genesis chapter 3, where it talks about the woman coming up underneath the curse. Do you think perhaps that plays into the fact that she can't take multiple men but has to be subject unto one man? And I kind of read some of the scriptures showing that she's under subjection to the man, and not only that he should rule over her, and also that they have to be silent in certain situations, and that they're saved through that childbearing and being faithful in holiness and sobriety unto this man. And in Peter, it says, even if the man goes off, that, let me read this because I don't want anybody getting mad at me either. And I'm not, and again, I'm not pushing a position. I'm very curious because I haven't heard anybody that has been really absorbed into the subject as you are, brother, and as knowledgeable about it. So I just want to, I'm going to read this text as well, what I was referring to in Peter. All right, so this is 1 Peter, and it's chapter 3, verse 1. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. So we see that situation you brought up earlier, like even if the woman leaves, she has to remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And we also see here that even if the husband is not acting in the way he should, that she should even, continue to be good to him and submit herself unto him as a good example. Perhaps, she may find favor in his eyes. And as well, it says in another place that you should submit yourselves unto your masters, even if they're perverse or froward. You see, and it's referring to this headship. And it's showing you that, those that submit, the lesser that submit to the greater, when they do so, it can bring favor in certain situations, especially with a husband and a wife, because a lot of contentions come from the fact that the wife wants to rule over the husband, or she doesn't want to submit to the husband, and that indignation that comes out of a man comes because he's dishonored or disgraced in the eyes of his family or a woman. So this is why God wants the woman to submit to the man, because he's the stronger vessel, and whenever she rises against him, within the man rises up, contention and strife in the household. And so there's a lot of things about that. But I just wanted to see what you thought about that curse in Genesis, where it said, the woman, once God said that, because of what she had did, that her sorrow would be, her bearing these children and having this pain and conception and her husband ruling over her. And do you think that plays into the polygamous marriage we see coming later with Lamech, who is really a wicked man, who is like the first one to have 2 wives, and then us coming down through the scriptures and seeing these different things connected with men having multiple wives, as in some of the misfortunes that we see and the things that are done?
Oh, yeah. So I would definitely think that, I'll say this definitively, that Adam did not hold dominion over Eve. That's not even mentioned until she stepped out of order. Even when he stepped out of order, it was like, yo, what did you do? It was like, oh, man, she did it. And then she was addressed because she stepped out. And this is why I think the New Testament said the man was not in transgression, but the woman, because she stepped out and did X, Y, and Z. So prior to then, why would you need to be subject to me? When you get a perfect balance in relationship, and not that can be created under the order that we under now, when you get a perfect balance, you don't necessarily need to have dominion over your wife. And she don't necessarily need to be subject, because in the Genesis or the Bereshit, there is no record where Eve was subject to Adam before the fall. They just existed. When whatever they were doing, I don't know if he said, look, you name these animals, I name these. But once she stepped out of order, your desire shall be to your husband, and he shall rule over you. That wasn't the case before. Now, now I would also say that I don't think there would have been, just personally, and this is probably an assumption, but I don't think that there would have been any case that would have allowed for a woman to have multiple husbands in Genesis at all. I think that the two of them just would have procreated children, and life would have went on, happiness. They would have ate from the tree of life. They would have lived forever. I wouldn't even be sitting here having this conversation. But it didn't work out like that. So I think that when you start dealing with the multiplicity of it, when you look at Isaiah 4:1, different people argue this text, but, I think that Bible prophecies can be used in different ways. When you look at Isaiah 4:1, it said, in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, will eat our own bread, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that scenarios arose because of the desolation that Israel was in, that women were rising up and saying, look, this brother have some type of something going on, we'll take our bread and we'll do whatever and just let us be called out by your name. And it said specifically to take away the reproach from us. Now, when you look into the reproach of women, every woman in the scripture that did not have a child was considered reproached. That was the major thing that they were saying. Give me a child. That was the reproach that needed to be taken away. We'll be called by our own name, and now you have this 7 women cleaving hold to one man. Then you had cases of war. Like if you found a captive woman in Deuteronomy 21, bring her to your house, shave her head, pare her nails, let her bewail her family a full month, and then she can be your wife. So there are so many different scenarios that tied into it, but I think in the Bereshit, you didn't necessarily have that. Again, my brother died. He didn't have children. I could deny it and say, look, I ain't trying to sleep with my brother's wife. He dead, but that's still nasty. I don't look at her like that. Or I could be like, you know what? I got to keep a name to my brother going, so let's be able to do this, and then I raise up seed to my brother. And those are the cases I was pointing out earlier, that women who say, oh, there's a double standard. No, there's not no double standard. If I raised up seed to my brother, and according to Deuteronomy 25, I had to raise up, a male child, and I lay with that woman for 6 straight years, and she kept producing woman, then the scripture clearly said I had to take her to wife. So there's a lot of scenarios under the after the fall of man that allow for things that just weren't in the Genesis. And I would just have to say what Yeshua said or Christ said. In the beginning, it wasn't so. So is it, one of my buddies who's a minister at Church of Christ, I think he uses the term, well, it was accepted but not commissioned. Like God never said, go do such and such, but he accepted it. I forget the term he used, but, we kind of dialogue about this because I think one of our conversations he was saying that if a man lay with another woman, he committed adultery, now that woman free. I'm like, whoa, hold on. And that was the point of probably why I started this conversation. Again, I'll just recap really quickly. If a married man lays with a woman that's not married, then according to what Christ was saying, the wife can't put him away for that. She can't go and say, well, he slept with somebody else, I'm putting him away. Not in Matthew 19. And if she do put him away, she can't be married to another while he liveth, because she would be considered adultery. If a man put away with his wife and she didn't commit fornication, then he would be considered adultery and cause her to commit adultery. So I think it's a lot of things that happened after the fall, but I did want to hone in on what allowed a person to be married, divorced, and then what constitutes remarriage. And I think that what I was pointing out again is uniformity between Moses, Christ, and Paul.
Yeah, I do want to say something about that as well. I think that Adam had headship before the actual, what we see, he shall rule over thee, because, she was made out of his side and God brought her to him, and, he had named her. He said, this is woman, and he said, I think it was something like flesh of his flesh and bones of his bones and so forth. So I see that as him naming it, and or her, which came after him. And when I see throughout the scriptures, I'm not going to go through it all, but I just have a slight disagreement with you there. I would say that Adam had headship over her, at her creation, seeing that she was brought to him, presented before him, even as a gift, if you will, but as his possession. And something he should take care of course, and love and cherish, and not treat bad, but treat as his own flesh, but still that he is, the one that has the preeminence, or that comes first. And so...
Yeah, I would definitely say I would agree with that. The only caveat I would say is it just wasn't worded that he had dominion over her and that her desire was going to be to him until after the fall. Now, that may have already existed because when she saw him, he was happy, she was happy. So I don't think it's that much variation in that thought.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say as well, you open up a really good topic. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be talking about it, brother. And like the brother said, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to have a lot of interest in what you're talking about. But I wanted to say as well, in the New Covenant, when we see the church in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, it says that we shouldn't go before unbelievers in certain church matters and things like that. That's something that we're going to have people who are very Western-minded are going to have a hard time accepting anything that you're really saying, because a lot of people in marriages anyway go before the unbelievers to get contracts. Not saying that you shouldn't, but I'm saying that they go before the unbelievers to get married. And when at the end of the day, when a woman has a disagreement with her husband, she's not going to go to the church first. They've been programmed. Most of them have been taught by, what they've seen when they're young, what they've seen in their communities, what the women around them have done, which is usually go get a divorce or even, seek counseling outside of the church or some other means to rectify that. And in the New Covenant, we see that within the church, that's the nation. I mean, that is the people of God. That is the New Covenant people, or Israel. So when we look at that situation, those things are supposed to be dealt with within men who are anointed by God in order to give that wisdom, knowledge, and understanding and counseling that's needed in a situation that you're talking about. So I just wanted to say that that's a big problem of why within the church of God, within family systems are so weak, and that's because in a lot of situations, the enemy has developed a lot of things to make it easy for women to run away from their husbands. Now, I'm not talking about an abusive situation where a woman's getting hurt or if she's having physical violence or anything happen to her of that nature, What I'm talking about is if they're just having disagreements or discrepancies and she wants to seek divorce or some other means, it's very easy for her to seek that outside of the church and find that and even have support in that. And so I just wanted to say, with what you're doing and teaching, do you have, I don't know if you have a congregation, do you actually have a congregation where you practice these things? Is your ultimate goal in this situation to prove that when it comes to the scriptures, that men can have multiple wives even today, and that also that the women, they're not supposed to have a problem with it according to the scripture? And basically, is what you're saying that if they do have a problem with it according to the scripture and they seek to even be released or to try to get divorced or be divorced, they're actually committing a sin or going against the counsel of God in that situation, even to the point that if they married another, they would be in adultery? I mean, is that basically what you're stating?
Oh, no, so not necessarily. So I just to recap what I was stating, in Matthew 19:9, it says, "And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication." So I had to bring in the types of things that allow for, I had to bring in the definition of fornication.
The man can't do that, right? Yeah. He can't just divorce her and hate her for no reason. And but
right.
I'm saying now, if a man, in your scenario, if a man or in your congregation or the Church of God, because ultimately you're teaching the Bible, so in the Church of God, from your perspective, if a man has a wife and he's just your regular man who's just baptized, reborn, born again, following Jesus Christ, renewed, regenerated in the Spirit, and he has a wife, his first love, a virgin he meets, let's say, and he lays with her and she becomes his flesh. If this man goes and sleeps with another woman, even if it's just a casual thing, I guess according to the law, like you were saying earlier, he would have to take her as his wife perhaps because of her father. So let's say he takes on a second wife. This man having two wives, his first wife, she shouldn't have anything against that according to the scriptures in your scenario or what you're teaching, right?
No. Not that she couldn't have anything against it, because we live in a conventional society that people could be agitated by that.
No, I mean according to the Bible. I mean according to the Church of God.
Right, and I'm just saying
Church of the Living God, the pillar and ground of truth. You see.
Right, and
because
I'm saying
that's
according to
that's
the
what our eternal life in obeying the Most High God is fixed in. So when we're talking about from a doctrinal standpoint in the Church of the Living God, which is the light of the world, because we're setting the example for all the other nations, and we are showing through our actions what is condoned and what is condemned in the eyes of God, because we're all going to be judged according to His standard. So what I'm saying is, in the Church of God, is that scenario that I just provided, where you're just an average born-again man. If he has a wife, if he takes on a second wife, today is that permissible, in your eyes? And as well, I would say yes from what you said. But as well, when it comes to that first wife, if she leaves him and is ever married, she's an adultery according to what you've taught, right?
Right. That's my point. So that is one of my points. So when you look at and we should probably talk offline to be building on this a little more. When you look at 1 Corinthians 7, I don't know where I lost my pointer, but 1 Corinthians 7, it says, maybe I'm skipping over, but the wife is bound by her husband so long as he liveth. Oh, 1 Corinthians 7:39. The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth, but if her husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. And Christ said in Mark chapter 10, and if a woman shall put away her husband and be married to another, she committeth adultery. So in the scenario you just gave, brother gets married, been married with a woman, and then somewhere down the line deals with another woman, and his first wife says, or his wife, and the other one wasn't his wife for whatever reason, and she says, well, I don't like this, and I'm leaving. She can't pull out Mark chapter 10. She can't pull out Deuteronomy chapter 24. She can't pull out Corinthians. She can't pull out Matthew chapter 19 and go marry somebody else. Because if she does, according to Mark chapter 10, and if a woman put away her husband and be married to another, she committeth adultery. I don't care personally that you don't like the situation you found yourself in. If you decide to go be vengeful and say, well, I'm about to go out there and find me somebody and lay with them, you commit adultery. And if the husband put away his wife and she did not fornicate, meaning whatever, the various examples I gave earlier in the text, if she did not fornicate and he go marry somebody else, he committed adultery. And Romans chapter 8, I believe, also said the wife is bound by her husband so long as he liveth. So she may not like it. It may not be the best thing for her to deal with. But if she go marry somebody else and put away her husband, she committed adultery. Anybody who married her because she put away or left without the right auspices, she's an adulterer. And that person that takes her is an adulterer. And that is the only reason that polygyny was brought into the context of the picture, because conventionally people are not, and because, the churches, everybody, you can, download a sermon online and pop up and say, hey, you got a YouTube video on the Facebook page. I'm an Israelite, I'm a teacher, I'm a pastor, I'm a such and such. And I made a point on the previous show. When you look at, example, a religious group, the Jehovah's Witnesses, you don't see people breaking off from them and forming their own version of Jehovah's Witnesses. You're either with them as a group or you don't go set up something else. So you don't see the Jehovah's Witnesses Church of Christ or Jehovah's Witnesses. It's uniformity as one entity. And if things were set up like that, as Hebrews or whichever have you, then I would definitely tie into the fact that don't go to the unjust. You come right to one of these ministries across the nation that we got, and we have some type of uniformity, that if that man did this, that, and the third, you can get biblical, scriptural counseling on that. But, again, the reason I was bringing in the fact of polygyny example you gave is because women tend to take it, even the sister that called in saying, if he sleep with somebody, it's a double standard. But again, she couldn't show any record where a woman was sleeping with multiple men and wasn't considered a whore, harlot, or adulterer, or wasn't stoned to death, or if she was engaged or betrothed. But you got plenty of record where the man did it, and in one scenario in 2 Samuel 8 and 12 or 12 and 8, he told David, look, man, if you wanted more women, I would have gave them to you. Why are you taking this man's wife? So under that context, these things were brought in. But I wanted to just try to exaggerate my point where a woman in that scenario, my husband, who I've been with since I was 19, now I'm 30, he dealt with some other woman, and I'm about to go leave him, and I'm about to be with somebody else. You're an adulterer. And if a man put away his wife for another woman, you're an adulterer. But I always try to make the point that what Jesus didn't say is if you don't put her away and you marry another, he never said you was an adulterer. And that's when that kind of polygynous thing got brought in, because I can only go what he actually said and what Paul said and what Moses said to kind of bring my point. But I think for the sake of Sal and whoever else, I think we should definitely try to pick up and get in contact with each other so we can maybe finish this discourse. But yeah, let me turn it back over to Sal.
Yeah, what I'll do, I'll just share Bishop Eliyahu's information behind the scenes with you, so you can continue to interact with each other and dialogue. Once again, family, I've been.
He ain't gonna be like that last person, is he? Sorry.
Yeah, man. But what I'll do is I'll let you get some last words, and we appreciate the family out there that tuned in and called in and asked their questions. Of course, we're going to look for the responses on YouTube. See what we got to say to YouTubers out there in the comment section. In regards to this.
Yeah, so I think thanks, Sal, for opening up the dialogue and the opportunity to get on and speak. I definitely appreciate your patience and long suffering. And it's just 3 hours, some change out of the evening that you could be, reading or doing whatever you're doing with your spare time. Just as a closing couple of comments, the marriage, divorce, and remarriage. What I tried to do is talk about a few of the scenarios that allow for people to be married and gave those examples. What constitutes a divorce? So if a man was putting away his wife, according to Moses, according to Christ, and according to Paul, it was because of fornication or uncleanness, Moses called it. And if anybody was putting away their spouse and it didn't, let me take that back. if a man was putting away his wife and she did not commit fornication, he could not go marry somebody else because Christ called that an adulterer. If a woman was putting away her husband and being married to somebody else, she's also considered an adulterer. And unless fornication was involved, people should not have been put away from the beginning. So I think that those were some of the points that we're making. There's a couple other points that I wanted to jump into, but we opened up for calls, and it took the shape the way the Creator had it take shape. But I definitely appreciate all the people who were able to listen in, comment, ask questions, and most likely willing at some other point, maybe it'll be a part 2 to it, to delve into the other parts that I didn't cover. So, hallelujah. If there's no other thoughts, Sal, thank you for your time, and peace to everybody.